Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, WTFW with another fiction. What if Deku become a scientist? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. This was the end. At least that's what Izuku thought, as he looked over the side of the bridge he was on. Today was the day he'd finally end it all. He has thought about this for a while, but says that there was nothing else. He had no other avenue or backup plans. He gave it his all, and honestly, that is the one good thing he could say for himself. But no more. The words off all around him, his best friend and even his idol, all ripped every last shred of self-drive he had left. All it would take was one final step. But before he could, something grabbed his hand. He turned around and saw a man who was red in the face, breathing heavily, and standing on shaky legs. It was obvious. He was in a hurry to get somewhere. In his hands was a cluster of papers, but that detail didn't matter as he heard the man speak. "Why, young man, wait," he said breathlessly. Don't do it," he pleaded. Izuku ripped his hand away and snapped. "Why not? What's the point? I have no reason to go on anymore. I have no purpose." "Then let me give you a new one," the man exclaimed. Izuku looked at the man. Near to the verge of tears, he asked in a soft tone, "What?" Just answer me this," he told him while collecting the paper in his other hand. Holding them out, he asked, "Did you write these?" Izuku looked at the papers and saw that they were the remains of his old hero analysis notebook. He remembered when he was on top of a building and tearing out sheet after sheet, letting them fly off into the wind. He was also reminded that it was one of the many times he tried to end it, but chickened out before finally finishing the deed on this bridge. At least then his body wouldn't be found, just forgotten like he wanted. How?" Izuku stammered out. "I saw you when you were letting them fly free. It took a day, but I got them all. Then spend the rest of that time trying to find you. And I'm glad I did," he explained. Izuku said nothing as he dropped the stack, making the man quickly retrieve them. Izuku turned around and told him, "You should just forget about them. They're worthless." He said the last part with a shudder. The man looked at him incredulously and stated, "Worthless? What are you talking about? These are amazing." Izuku felt a shiver of pride run up him as the man continued his praise. "Never in my whole life have I ever seen a more amazing talent. Such intricacy, such detail, such passion. You have a truly unique gift, quirk or no quirk," he said with the kindest tone ever given to him. Izuku looked at him with shock and asked, "How did you?" The man then stood on the bridge with him before sitting down and letting his legs dangle as he told him, "I kind of figured it out. A lot of suicides are from the quirkless. You must have been through a lot." Izuku didn't sit beside him, instead choosing to squat and hug his knees as he asked, "Why do you care? I'm just some nobody." The man looked at him again like he was crazy and ranted, "Nobody. Nobody, young man. You have a gift for detail and analysis on a level that's even better than most valedictorians. You have something greater than any quirk in the world, a sharp mind. And being able to think is better than being able to punch," he told him while poking his head. Izuku felt his smothered emotions break free as he admitted, "All my life, I've always wanted to be a hero. I figured," the man said softly. "But everyone told me I couldn't, that I was weak. But I didn't care if I had a quirk or if it was strong. Heck, I didn't even care about being a popular hero. I just wanted to help people with a smile on my face," he told him, pouring his guts out in thick tears before sniffling back and saying, like All Might," the man finished, making Izuku look at him. The man gave a small chuckle and told him, "Yeah, I idolized him when I was younger." The man then leans back and looks up while telling Izuku, "You know, you and I aren't too different. I have a dream that people say is impossible, and I started to believe them." Izuku looked away, wanting to bury his head in his arms, thinking he knew where this conversation would lead. That is until the man followed up saying, "Until I put in my blood, sweat, and tears into my dream, and I finally made something. Something I know will change the world." Izuku was now on his butt as he saw the man's fists tighten. And looking at him with a mix of determination and desperation, he admitted, "But I need help. Your help." "Me?" Izuku asked while pointing at himself. "You say you're hopeless and in the pits of despair without any other purpose in life?" The man asked Izuku while grabbing his shoulders and looking him dead in the eyes. "Then let me give you one. You may not have power, but you have brains. And that's the thing that brought us to where we are as a species." He told him seriously before pulling away, and bowing to him he begged, "So please, young man, become my assistant." Izuku was silent for a long while, which made the man worry he'd deny or jump. But Izuku did neither. He just sat and thought. And after a long thought, let one single tear run down his face as he replied, "Being a hero was a long shot. I knew it wouldn't work, but I wanted to give it my all." He then looked at the man and stated with confidence, "I accept." Several weeks had gone by since Izuku had started to work with Egon on the Singularity Soul. It was strange at first, to say the least. Izuku was wary of Egon for a long while when he started. He was, strange to say the least. The way he would jump at the most insignificant of things, change his tone and mannerism in severe ways depending on the situation, and at the drop of a hat. The way he spoke, many times stuttering or just talking so low, he looked like he was just mouthing words, looking off into space with a glazed expression. His reasoning for doing certain things. Overworking himself, overcarrying things to the point it was comical, and so much more. Then one day Izuku realized something. This is how other people perceived him all the time. With that revelation made, Izuku became much more at ease with him. Despite what seemed like the madness of trying to juggle school and research, he eventually came into a rhythm. He'd get up, change, eat, say goodbye to his mom, and head out. After school, he'd head to Egon's home and go through the tub of paper to pick out what he needed for homework or answers to a test he'd have to copy down. After this, he'd go into his own designated office space and begin experimenting. After several hours of research and experimentation, he'd go home, eat, bathe, and go to sleep. "Hey, Izuku. Wow, you sure are focused. Found anything yet?" Egon asked as he walked into Izuku's office space. Coffee mug in hand, he saw Izuku looking through a microscope and then skimming his computer before writing something down. Without looking up from the device, he answered, "Just looking over its structure and chemical compounds to cross-reference anything that matches up." "How is that going?" Egon prompted him, while looking over at his notes, which were just about chicken scratch. Izuku sighs dejectedly and tells him, "Not well. It doesn't match up with anything, at least on Earth. I had a feeling it might be alien," Egon said with a chuckle while taking a drink. Then a stray thought crossed his mind, and he turned around to ask, "Where'd you find this anyway?" Egon got a serious look on his face and put the mug down. Two things that were never a good sign. Then he interlaced his finger while putting his thumb under his chin and finger over his nose. Yet again another bad sign, and Izuku knew he was in for a ridiculous story. Well, back at the laboratory, a small group was sent out on an investigative dig site from a crashed meteor, myself being amongst them. Anyhow, I unearthed the crystal in a completely different site far away from the meteor crash site. They told me it was just a really big crystal formation, but allowed me to take it back anyway, he explained while forcing a smile. Izuku looked at him, then at the crystal fragment he had under the microscope, then back at Egon where he asked, "So how'd you manage to get it back here?" "I kinda stole it," Egon admitted while twiddling his fingertips. Izuku blinked. Then his face fell as he replied, "I don't know what I was expecting. I'll run some tests on it and get back to you on my findings." Then one day, Izuku stormed into Egon's office. causing the man to spit his coffee and knock over stacks of paper as he was typing on his computer. Running up to him in a frenzy, he began his absolute nonsense spree. Sir, 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 Izuku yelled while barging in. What? Egon answers while trying to calm himself from the shock. Crystal, crystal, crystal. Yes. It did. Okay, enough of the SpongeBob references. Just tell me what it is that happened. Egon told him firmly while grabbing his shoulders. Okay, so I was running several splinters through several different tests, and I finally found something that the energy source inside is capable of. Izuku quickly and breathlessly explained. Egon then sat back in his chair, straightened himself and his coat out, sat with legs crossed, and stated, Okay, start from the beginning and leave nothing out. Izuku nodded and explained. So first I took several of the crystals and placed them into jars completely submerged in several different substrates. Blood, urine, sweat, saliva, tears, and… He dropped off. And? Egon prompted him. Semen. Izuku admits with a cough. Egon blinks at him before sighing and saying with a shake of his head. Maybe I shouldn't have asked for the details, but go on. After a couple of days of soaking, I found out that almost no change had been made to them, so I decided to take them out and try out some other working theories. Except I forgot about the one that was still in the blood. When I finally realized and pulled it out, it had changed color from the pale glowing white to a crimson red. And after cleaning it off, I felt some sort of strange connection to the crystal as I was holding it. Almost like it was a switch inside of my head. And when I turned it on, the crystal began to leak blood. Izuku told him with excitement building in every word, making Egon grow more and more intrigued. So I decided to let it drain out into a jar, thinking it absorbed the blood inside. But after a while, I found out that wasn't the case. Instead of just expelling all the blood, it continually kept making more and more. When I retrieved the crystal, I felt the same connection again and flipped the switch off, and the crystal stopped producing the blood. Egon's eyes widened at this revelation but didn't say anything till he was done, so I decided to do the same thing. But this time I put several into different jars filled with medicine. Liquid aspirin, hydrogen peroxide, burn cream, and alcohol among a few others. Anyhow, after leaving it inside of those medicines to soak for about 5 days, the same thing happened like the blood crystal. I was able to turn them on, and they produced all the substance in consistent amounts with no signs of running out. Izuku exclaimed with his arms in the air, pure zeal taking over every word. Incredible. Egon jumped up from his chair with him before being struck with a thought and asking, Did you try to make the blood splinter absorb anything else? Izuku nods, then tells him, I did, but nothing. I also found the splinters are very fragile, and if broken it stops producing the substance. Egon raised an eyebrow at this and stated, Fragile. I have a hard time breaking these things when I make them, even with the energy inside of them. I guess they become more brittle when they absorb something. Izuku guessed with a shrug. Did you find anything else? Egon asks again. Izuku nods and takes out a clipboard, and after flipping a few pages he tells him, Yes, I've tested a few with other states of matter. For solids, no results no matter what I try. For gas, it works so long as there are no other air particles in the homemade vacuum chamber I made. As for plasma, the only thing I could think to do is try to directly conduct it to a power source. And now it generates its power signal. Egon blinks before exclaiming, You caught lightning in a bottle. Izuku looks off to the side, while making an uncomfortable expression, while replying, I guess. But I would like to try that one day. As of now, it's just enough to power a few appliances, any more and it'll shatter. Izuku, these are, Egon suddenly said, his expression and face growing dark, making Izuku shudder and resent on edge. All before he exploded into a smile, grabbing the boy and lifting him in a hug while saying, Amazing. I can't believe you discovered so much in just a few weeks. It would take university students and professors months, if not years, to do what you've done and make results. You should be proud. Izuku couldn't help but smile back as a king of pride and joy swelled up in him. Once he was let down, he told the professor, "There is one other thing." Egon raised an eyebrow at this, letting him continue. "When I was in close proximity to one of the splinters, without anything absorbed into it, I found myself far less fatigued than what I do when I'm not. So after putting it through your radiation detector, I found it gave off a sort of harmless radiation," Izuku explained. Egon placed his fist into his palm and stated like a revelation, "I have been wondering why in the world you seem to be so full of energy all the time despite the work effort you put in. Having said that, I don't want you to abuse it. Who knows what could happen with long-term exposure." Izuku nods in agreement as Egon backs away from his previous scolding mannerisms. "On the offhand, with a bit of tweaking, we could go completely off the grid. And on the other," he draws out while thinking of to the side and telling him, "I think our money situation has just been solved." "How so?" Izuku questions. Egon sits back in his chair and thinks a bit more before coming to a consensus in his mind and telling the teens, "So, I'm gonna use most of my resources to get some medical drugs and other such things. Izuku, I want you to make splinters of each one. After that, we're gonna go dumpster diving and getting into contact with as many hospitals and medical providers in Misutafu." Izuku nods rapidly and states, "I'll do my best." A couple of weeks later, and the two scientists set out to do as they said. With Egon's connections, he was able to acquire medical-level drugs and other medications alongside many other types. Once they had it, Izuku set to work making sure that each other would be copied into an individual splinter. The whole process would take 5 days, so they set off on their other chore. Going down to a beach that was covered in junk, the two of them rent a pickup truck and spend the next 5 days taking plastic water cooler jugs back to Egon's house, washing them out, and then returning to do it all again. They even managed to find a huge fish aquarium that was in near perfect condition. After having all these empty containers, they set to work on the most tedious part, filling each container with a different medicine. It was hard for them to figure out when they were filled, even when away, so they made a sensor that would go off to a wireless alarm when they weren't home or paying attention. They even took the time to experiment with one of the splinters, making it fill over a dozen water cooler jugs and the fish tank. And to their surprise, it did just that without any signs of stopping. While the filling process was happening, Egon went around calling every hospital that would listen to come to a showing at a theater that he rented out. A few weeks went by and everything was finally set up. Egon stood behind the stage with a mix on his ear and nodded to Izuku, who was on the other side of the stage. They had practiced this situation for days on end, and now they were ready to sell their new miracle product. And hopefully, they would bite. Egon walked out from the curtain, and the theater grew quiet as he addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, CEO and managers of many medical facilities, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come today." He complimented them, getting a thank you round of applause in return. He raised his hand, and the clapping stopped. Once they all went quiet, he spoke. "Now I bet you're wondering why you should even give me 2 more seconds of your time for asking you to come out here. Well, I'm glad you think that, because I have a little something I'm sure all of you will be wanting to clamber over each other to get. What is that, you may ask? I'll show you." He then reaches into his lab coat pocket and pulls out a splinter that was colored off white, proclaiming, "Behold, the splinter." No reaction from the crowd, just confusion. So he continues telling them, "This small crystal, made with my quirk and infused with a special energy source, is capable of recreating any liquid or gas-based substance after prolonged exposure. This one in particular contains a mixture of lidocaine, bupivacaine, mepivacaine, and nitrous oxide, or as I'm sure most of you know it, anesthetic gas in liquid form." At the sound of this, The whole crowd broke out into loud conversations amongst one another, and to the professor who had to calm them down, telling them, "People, please, no questions until after the showcase. And I'm pretty sure I'm about to answer all your questions and concerns. First off, a demonstration. The splinter needs a mental command when in physical contact to activate it. Doing so will cause the splinter to leak out its content." To show what he meant, he took out a glass beaker from his pocket, turned on the splinter, and placed it inside the moment it started to leak. He left it to sit in his hand, holding it out for the crowd to see as they all watched it with massive intrigue. After a few minutes, the beaker was completely submerged in the liquid. Egon then took out the splinter and turned it off, while placing the beaker on the ground and telling the crowd, "As you can see, the splinter has filled this cup in a short time." A few mutterings went around, but Egon continued, saying, "Now I'm sure you are all thinking that it will run out, correct? Well, allow me to put your minds at ease. This particular splinter has been put through extensive experiments, and we have come to show what has been produced consistently over a period of 2 weeks." Egon clapped his hand, and Izuku started to bring out small push carts with water cooler jugs filled with the same fluid in the cup on the floor. Izuku kept going back and forth, bringing out jug after jug until he took a few minutes to bring out the fish filled it to the top with the same fluid. At this sight, the crowd once again exploded into talking and excitement. Some are even trying to offer money, but Egon put a halt to their jabbering and explained, "However, I must warn you that they are extremely fragile. Observe." With that, he dropped the splinter in his hand, and the crystals shattered on contact with the floor, breaking into so many that it looked like bits of crushed ice about to melt. This makes the crowd become dejected by the product. Some were even now skeptical. However, Egon once again put their minds at ease with another demonstration. And for those of you who are still unsure if what I just brought out was the real deal, perhaps a demonstration. He then clapped his hands and Izuku brought out a hospital gurney with a man that looked like a pig laying on it with his back supported up so he could see and be seen. Next to him was a heart and brain monitor. "This is Mr. Wang." Mr. Wang was kind enough to volunteer for this showcase. He introduced the man while taking out a syringe and explaining, "Chef Wei, I will now take the liquid from both the tanks and cup I just filled to demonstrate, using no more than 10 cc of each." He then took a sample from each spot and injected it into the Roman 4 injector on his arm. After a minute or so, Mr. Wang's eyes started to flutter, and he passed out right in his seat. A slight murmur sounds around the auditorium. Egon motioned to the man and said, "As you can see from the monitor, Mr. Wang is completely under the effect of the anesthetics." But before any more commotions or explosions on deals could be made, Egon exclaimed, "And that's not all. I have splinter of all different kinds of medications and drugs." He waved his hands, and after taking away the asleep man, Izuku brought out a rack full of different splinters that held different medical medicine and drugs. This leaves the crowd in awe and excitement. Now, as far as pricing, I'm sure you can all understand that such an item is bound to save any of you millions from having to order time and time again. So it will cost any of you around 20 years of what you would spend on that particular drug or medication. But think of it this way. He quickly filled up before the crowd could get cold feet, locking their attention. "In the long term, you'll be making all that money back tenfold," he exclaimed, and that seemed to once again grab their interest in the objects. After seeing the crowd start to warm up and get hotter by the second, Egon put on his most friendly face and in sweet words asked, "So, what do you say?" Several hours later, Izuku and Egon sat at a table, back in Egon's office at his home, with the two of them staring at the computer screen with Egon's bank account info placed on it. The two of them had their mouths open in shock and awe at what they saw after the selling event. Neither of them said a word for a long time, but eventually Egon was the one to state the obvious. 50 million. $50 million. We just made $50 million in one sitting from just a few dozen splinters and all those tubs of medicine, he exclaimed in zeal while jumping up and around in his chair. Well, people were offering more and more. It turned into an auction, Izuku stated, trying not to act like his mentor. This is amazing. I've never seen so many zeros in my account, he exclaimed while picking up Izuku and spinning him around before stopping and asking him, "Do you know what this means?" "No more money trouble?" Izuku answers. "No. Well, yes. But that is not the only thing. We could use this money to start our research facility. And if we offer these to the other hospitals in the other provinces in Japan, we could make more," Egon told him. "I'm glad to hear that, cause I've been doing a little cyber searching and found this," Izuku said to him while bringing up a new page on the computer and showing a nearly run-down research facility. "It's pretty beat up and in need of a lot of rework. But I'm pretty sure that would be cheaper than trying to build or even buy one already made. We might need to budget a little bit, but it's more than doable. Also, I found a good construction company to help in the first bit, Uraraka Construction Co., Izuku explained with a nervous smile, unsure of how he would react. "You have been a busy little worker bee," Egon praised him while rubbing his head. "Of course, then comes the expenses of trying to get new equipment, paying for bills and employees. We need to find a more sustainable way to make money, at least until we can get our feet off the ground," he told Izuku. "Oh, I have a few ideas for that," Izuku excitedly proclaimed. Egon smiled at this before his face turned into one of foresight and asked, "By the way, kid, have you told your parents about what you've been doing? I can't believe I haven't thought to ask this before. But from an outside perspective, you spend so much time with me does seem strange, to put it lightly." Izuku's expression shifted, and he admitted while avoiding eye contact, "No, I haven't told my mom." Egon shucked air between his teeth and told him, "That's bad. And now that you mention it, there is a strange rumor going around about me, saying that I'm going on dates with older rich guys," Izuku admitted while putting a thoughtful expression on his face. I don't even like to date people my age. Forget somebody younger." Egon shivered with disgust while saying, "We need to fix that." "Yeah," Izuku admitted, already feeling the weight of responsibility hit him. How in the world would he be able to easily explain all of this to his mother? And how would she react? Or would she even accept it? Only time could tell, and the meetup date. Izuku sat at his dinner table, silent in his thoughts as his mother made them a hot meal. He played with his fingers, lost in his thoughts and emotions about what he should do. It has been decided that they should confront their problem head-on. But saying it on paper was far easier than putting it into practice. The plan was to ease her into what's been going on before getting into the heavier stuff. This is where he was now, waiting for an opportunity, or rather just to work up the nerve to say it. He sighs and decides now would be the best time, especially since Egon would be here soon. "So, Mom," Izuku starts as his mother just hums in reply. He gulps and finally admits, "You know how I've been telling you that I'm doing after-school activities, which is why I'm always coming home so late." Another hymn, and he takes a breath before relenting. "Well, I was lying. I figured," she said back. Izuku's eyes shot wide open as he stared at her. Mouth gaped in shock, and he blabbered out, "Wait, you knew?" She giggles and tells him while looking over her shoulder with a smile, "I'm your mother, sweetie. You can't hide anything from me. So what have you been up to?" "Well, it has to do with the friend who I told you would be coming over today," Izuku told her while looking at the third plate setup. Before he could continue, there was a knock at the door and Izuku told her, "That must be him." Inko turned off the stove and slipped off her oven mitts as she followed her son to the front door. Izuku unlocked and opened it while introducing, "Mom, I'd like you to meet." Before he could finish, Egon stumbled through the doorway, clearly leaning on the door in the best business suit he owned. A thick stack of papers was in his hands, and he tried to stay on his feet and prevented himself from letting the osiers go everywhere. Once he fixed himself, he adjusted his glasses, looked at the short puggy woman, and stammered out in a half-exhausted mess. "Hello, Mrs. Izuku. I'm Processor No Wait. I'm Professor Izuku and you're Mrs. Egon no. Hello, Mrs. Green Midoriya. I meant to say Midoriya." While Inko was more than confused and a bit on edge, Egon started to rifle through his papers and told her, "Hold on, I have it here somewhere." He then pulled out a sheet of paper and read quickly. "Hello, how are you? That's great to hear, I'm Professor." But before he could continue on his half-pronounced gargle, all the papers he was holding slipped from his hand, and they flew all over the front entry. Egon panicked so hard his glasses fell off, and he exclaimed, "Shoot, not again. I had this all set up for maximum success." He then started to rapidly look through all the papers and pulled up some quickly while reading them off. Potassium, zinc, hydrogen, nitrogen, sugar, oxygen. He paused after saying that. Looking up from the paper with tears on his eyes, he said, "That was the chemical compound for chocolate milk." "Professor Egon," Izuku draws out as the professor scrambles. "Izuku, sweetie, what is going on? And who is this mess of a man? I'm honestly a bit freaked out," Inko asked while getting closer to her son in defense. "Professor, I told you not to overthink this," Izuku scolded the man. With tears streaming down his face, he blubbered out, "I tried, but I couldn't help it. How are we going to explain this to my mom if you can't act normal in a non-business or professional manner?" Izuku half yelled at him. "I have no social skills," he yelled in self-shame and pity. "Izuku," Inko spoke once more, feeling freaked out. Seeing no way out of it now, he bit the bullet and admitted, "Mom, this is the real reason I've been out of the house so often." "Izuku," Inko gasped while grabbing her son's face and telling him on the verge of tears, "If you needed money, you should have just asked. Don't do something like this." Izuku was confused at first, but quickly realized what she was implying and exclaimed, "What? No, 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 Mom, it's not like that." Finally foregoing his papers, Egon stood up and defended himself, saying, "Ma'am, I know I didn't give you the best first impression, but believe me, I have no intentions of that nature." "Then what has a 30-year-old man and my son been doing all alone for several weeks?" she assumes back, while putting herself in front of her son. "He's been working with me," Egon told her quickly with no explanation. "Huh?" Inko choked back, confused once more. Izuku knew this was his chance. He had to use his ace in the hole. If he didn't, his mom would go for the phone and everything the two of them had been building would be destroyed. So he took a deep breath and readied himself. "Mom, I don't want to be a hero anymore," he said out of the blue. "While what?" Inko asked, stupefied by the proclamation. She turned to her son and held his hand. She asked him, "Izuku, baby, what happened? You wanted to be a hero for as long as you could walk and talk. Why would you suddenly change that?" "I gave up on that dream a long time ago. It's not worth it anymore," Izuku admitted while looking away. "Izuku," Inko said in a small, shaky tone. "Mrs. Midoriya, ma'am?" Egon butted in as respectfully as he could with a few papers in his hands. "Several weeks ago, I found these papers from one of your son's analysis notebooks. I was floored by the amount of details and information on each page, finding things that others wouldn't. His intelligence and observation skills are unmatched. So I tracked him down and asked him to help me with a project I was working on when he was in a slump. And thanks to him, in the last few weeks, he's made huge discoveries and some money to boot," he explained with ever-growing excitement while handing the torn note pages. Then a keyword hit her mind in the midst of all her confusion and emotions, and she said baffled, "Money. Around $50 million. Egon casually told her. Dropping the papers and holding the wall, she exclaimed, 50 million? Egon nods his head excitedly and tells her, "Yes. And it is all thanks to your son. Ma'am, your son is a true genius, like none I've seen before. He has a gift that so many neglect or fail to gain. Your son is amazing." He then started to get on his knees and told her while bowing and half yelling, "So I ask you, no, I beg you, please allow your son to continue working with me. He could change the world." Inko was silent for a long while, allowing everything to sink in before turning to her son and asking, "Izuku, is this really what you want?" He nods and tells her with full sincerity, "It is. I don't think I've been so sure in a long time." She sighs and holds her son. She relents. "Then I guess I'll have no choice but to support you." "Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, thank you, thank you," Egon practically yelled from the floor. "But you know my son is still in school?" Inko asks as he brings up his head. "We've taken care of that," Egon tells her. "He doesn't have the right certifications." Inko argues back. "He can work on his degree while working with me. I know of some websites that allow you to get a legal degree," Egon assures her. "He's about to start high school." She continued. "I never really made it through high school myself," he admits. Inko thinks it over then barters. "I want him home at a more reasonable time. Trust me, I've been trying that myself." Egon rolls his eyes while glaring at Izuku, who looks away. "I want you to pay him," Inko tells him. Egon nods to this and tells her, "I was already planning on that. Once things got up and running and he had his degree, I was going to make him vice president." "My son? A vice president?" Inko gasps while holding her chest. Her lips then begin to quiver, and before either of the two men could act, Inko begins to shed tears like a faucet. Taken aback by this reaction, Egon jumps up and steps back a bit. Are you okay?" he asked her. Mom, please stop crying," Izuku begs her, as he too started to cry the same as her, making Egon think this was going to be a long dinner. Which it was. Izuku and Egon sat at his kitchen table with the room constructed into a mock meeting room. There was a large whiteboard hanging on the wall with Egon at the front, and Izuku sitting at one of the 4 chairs around the dinner table. Egon with a pointer stick in hand, and many colored dry erase markers and hand points to the board with a crudely drawn American dollar. "Well, Izuku, we have a problem," he told him while pointing at the drawing. "Money?" he questioned while looking at the drawing. Egon nods affirmatively and erases it while drawing more crude pictures and explaining, "As you well know, we are nearly out of the 50 million earned from the hospitals. Between buying, fixing, and expanding our new laboratory, plus the costs of all the machinery we got, we're at almost nothing, and we still have more expensive things to buy and do. More high-tech equipment and items used for experimentation, the monthly bill to run it, taxes, and of course employees." Izuku thought for a moment, then offered, "We could go to the other provinces in Japan and sell some of the splinters to those hospitals." Egon thinks on this, draws a pic of a splinter and a chart, then says, "That would pay for most, if not all, of what we need right now. But it's not sustainable in the long run. And trust me, it'll go fast," he told him while making the chart grow and then plummet before sighing in exasperation and complaining, "Sometimes I wish Japan wasn't so small. We have to think up a way to make a large and consistent cash flow without direct funding from the government." Izuku nods and says seriously, "Last thing we need is for them to get their hands on what we have." Egon nods back and states, "I agree. The less the better. Until we are more assured in our funds. What ideas do you have or what discoveries have you made?" Izuku takes out his notebook and flips through it while telling him, "Do you remember how one of the splinters absorbed blood and was able to reproduce it?" Egon sighs as he knows where this is going and waves him off saying, "Rikente, if we sell blood splinters of every type to every hospital, we'll be right back to where we are." "Not that," Izuku exclaimed firmly, making Egon jump from the suddenness. Izuku sat back down, calming himself and saying, I mean, do you know of that one person who's been making rounds in the medical world? The one with the unique blood quirk? Egon raises an eyebrow, thinks, and then realizes what he means. Then answered in explanation, the man with a blood quirk that instantly changes to any blood type it comes in contact with, even rare ones. The blood can even replace diseased or cancer-ridden cells. The blood that's more packed with cells per square millimeter than any high-altitude animal on the planet. I know about him. If we could get a sample and put it in a crystal, we could sell it off in individual blood packs along with every other blood type, Izuku offers with excitement. Egon smiled at seeing the kid's far thinking and smiled sadly before informing him. Normally, I'd agree with you. However, there's just one glaring problem. Getting that blood is near to impossible. He's constantly hounded by every hospital just for even a syringe full of his blood. People pay him oodles of money just to get some of it. We'd have to pay him a good chunk of our 50 million just to get a small sample. And because of all the money he's gotten, he has become an absolute self-entitled douchebag. I mean, samples of his blood on the black market go for hundreds of thousands. Sometimes even millions. I don't think we have to worry about that. Izuku tells him while reaching into his coat and pulling out a vial filled with red liquid. Is that? Egon asks while coming to him and taking the vial. Looking it over, he says while ruffling his hair. Shut up. But wait, how did you? I had to get my hands dirty and face. Izuku told him while looking away while rubbing a black and blue spot on his cheek. Egon's eyes widen at this, and he looks over at Izuku, seeing the many injuries that he covered up with clothes or makeup. He asks in a terrified voice, Izuku, what did you do? You know how he's prejudiced? Izuku tells him. I'm aware. He's one of those quirkish bastards. Seriously, what did you do? Egon asked in a concerned and fast tone. I bumped into him by complete accident after he got kicked out of a bar. I tried to sweet-talk him, but he wouldn't have it. Izuku began to explain. Egon bit his fists and said, I don't like where this is going. Then I told him I was quirkless, and he started to beat me. The teen finished off while looking away. What? Egon shouted in shock. But I defended myself, and in doing so I got a sample. He tried to reassure the man while holding the vial like it was gold. It took hours to get rid of all the alcohol inside of it. But it's a pure strain, he said in an excited tone. Egon grabbed his shoulder and asked him in worry, Izuku, why did you do that? He could have killed you. I was prepared. We needed the money, Izuku argued back. Egon rapidly shook his head and told him, that's no excuse to purposefully put yourself in danger. There were other ways we could get money without you getting hurt. Izuku looks down, realizing his mistake as Egon leans against the board and says in a trembling voice, if your mother finds out, she's not just gonna have a cow with me, but a whole dang elephant. After he gets done venting about this, he sighs and holds Izuku in a hug. He asks, just promise me you won't take any risks like that again. You're far too young to be acting like this. I promise. Izuku hugs him back. Egon pulls away and says to him, good. Anyhow, this will help us subvert much of our costs, but we need more. We can only sell these at maybe a couple hundred a pack. Then of course that super helium we've managed to make with one of the gas splinters. I have one other idea that I have sort of put into practice, Izuku admitted as Egon walked away to think. What else have you been doing behind my back? Egon said in a joking tone. Izuku pouted and argued. I haven't been doing anything behind your back. You're just never there to watch me. Egon sighs and tells him, well, I am the one who's in charge of making sure we don't go into the red. We'll discuss this later, but for now, tell me what it is you've done. You know how the crystal radiates a kind of radioactive energy? Izuku asks him as he nods in return. Well, I decided to see what would happen if something was exposed to it for a long period of time. Oh God, I don't like where this is going, Egon says under his breath. Iu waves his hands and tells him, No, 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 it's okay, I promise. I just used a pigeon for an experiment. Egon blinks and states seriously, Izuku, the last thing I need around here is some giant laser shooting murder bird. Do you see one? He sassed back. Egon looked around, sat in a chair, and said, Okay. Well, I'm not sure what happened entirely. Whether it evolved or devolved or even genetically morphed. Izuku ranted off. Getting concerned, Egon asked him, Izuku, can you please just get to the point? You're starting to freak me out. Izuku then went to another room, came out with something behind his back, and brought it out while admitting, I made this. Placed on the table was a creature that was a bird, about the size of a turkey, but not one. Egon blinks. Adjusting his glasses, he leaned in. After making sure he wasn't just seeing things, he sat back, not taking his eyes off the bird, and stated, Okay, first off, that's the least bad thing I could have expected. Second, is that what I think it is? He exclaimed while pointing at the bird, spooking it and making it run. Before it could Juno off the table, Egon grabbed the bird and examined it all around while saying, I mean, it makes some sense. Dodo birds and pigeons are biological cousins, with the dodo being large and flightless. Also, how did you hide this from me? You don't use the space you have properly, Izuku told him with a shrug. Egon opened his mouth to argue but stopped and admitted, Fair. So what's your plan with essentially recreating an extinct species? Izuku Yu then went into the microwave and pulled out a meat dish while offering Kisave, Taste this. Egon shrugs and pops a piece of the meat in his mouth. After chewing it a bit, he swallows and observes, A tad gamey, but it's pretty good. He then makes the connection and asks, Wait, is this? Izuku nods and the cigs turn in the man's head. Once he makes the realization, he guesses aloud. You plan to capitalize on the invasive and wild pigeons in the city, turn them into dodo, and sell the meat for a profit. Izuku nodded, then assured him, And don't worry, I tested the meat in excruciating detail. It's completely safe for consumption. It's pretty much no different from FDA-certified poultry meat. And I got a butcher on our side with a little bit of incentive. He told him while making a money sign with his hand. I was wondering why there was a large deposit to a butcher shop. Egon stated to himself before asking suspiciously, Anything else? I was hoping to test the crystal's radioactive effects on different plants to see if we could potentially make a superfood. Izuku tells him in a pleading tone. Egon sucks air through his teeth and tells him, Let's put a pin on that. We don't need to be doing a recreation of Little Shop of Horrors. Izuku looks disappointed by this, so Egon comes up with an alternative and asserts, But you can do one plant at a time, and nothing else. Just make sure they're either small flowers or vegetables. Izuku nods, then blabbers out aloud, If only we could use one of the splinters to make gold. Then a thought strikes him, and he asks Egon, Wait, can't gold be made into a liquid? And my crystals are heat resistant to a few thousand degrees. Egon tells him as the wheels also start to turn. Then the two of them look directly at each other and Egon states, seriously in a hiss tone, I'll get some gold and smelt it. You run some tests. We take this to our graves. Izuku nods and runs off to his office space as Egon does. After another long and boring day at school, Izuku finally made it to his front door. He didn't go to Egon's house today, since he told him that he couldn't come for some reason. So he went straight home, and now he was at the door. After unblocking and walking in, he called out, Mom, I'm home. Just then, at that moment, the dark house exploded into light, and the sound of popping hit his ears with confetti and streamers falling on his face and head. Followed up by two voices cheering, Congratulations! What, huh? Mom, Professor, what's going on? Izuku asked dumbfounded. It's a party, Inko explained. For you, Egon follows up. Me? What for? Izuku asks back, still unsure of what they meant. You seriously don't know? Inko asks as he shakes his head. She giggles and tells him, Izuku, you passed. Egon saw that Izuku didn't understand, so he jumped in and exclaimed, You passed your last test and aced it. You officially have your 4th degree. You have a doctoral degree. You can officially, and most importantly, legally work for me. I thought I was still at 2, Izuku stated, still a bit confused and overwhelmed. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if you didn't try to shoot straight for an honorary degree. Egon praised her. It's also the day that your research facility has finally completed construction, Inko told him. This finally snapped Izuku out of his funk, and he exclaimed excitedly, Wait, for real? That's awesome. It's also your graduation day, Egon added in. But I thought that wasn't for another 2 weeks, Izuku asked back, feeling confused and concerned if he lost track of time, which he did a lot recently. Inko nods and tells him, It is. But since you'll be so busy very soon, we thought it would be best to have the party now. She then brings her son into a hug and tells him, Izuku, I'm sorry. Taken aback by this, Izuku pulls back, and holding his mom's arms he questions her. Mom, why are you sorry? Because I feel partly to blame for your previous situation, she admitted while looking away. When I came to terms that you wanted to be a hero, even without a quirk, I was beside myself with worry. As your mother, I tried my best to support you, but in the back of my mind, I prayed you'd give up. I'm sorry. She told him with tears in her eyes, looking away in shame. She wipes her face and then tells him with a more upbeat attitude, But seeing you here and now, accomplishing more than I could ever expect and more than anyone else in the world, especially myself, and at your age, I can't help but feel proud of you. So very, very proud of you, she told him, all teary-eyed again. Mom. Izuku spoke back on the verge of tears before wrapping her in a hug and telling her, Thank you for always supporting and believing in me. Izuku. Egon lightly interjected at the moment. When they pull away, the man wraps his arm over his shoulder and tells him, This time is all about you. If not for you, none of this would have happened. You and you alone made all of this happen. You should feel proud of yourself for all you've managed to achieve. As far as I'm concerned, you're my hero, Izuku. Izuku's dam finally breaks, and he plunges his face into his chest while sobbing. Thank you, Professor, for giving me a chance when no one else would. Egon pets and rubs his back for a bit, but soon pulls him off while drying his face and proclaiming, Okay, enough of the waterworks. Let's eat and be merry. It truly was a great party. Izuku sat up from his desk and rolled his shoulders after sitting hunched over his desk. It has been another normal, quiet, and boring day at school. Actually, it's been nothing but boring since Egon gave him all the coursework to simply copy directly from and get a passing grade. Surprisingly, no one, not even Bakugo, had bothered him once in the past months. It was kinda nice to be ignored by everyone and not have to deal with them. And he wouldn't have to any longer since this was the last day of school. Their teacher left early, allowing them to do whatever until the bell rang. And boy was Izuku glad that it did, because he could swear he could feel Bakugo trying to burn holes into his head as he sat behind him. So after stretching and waiting for just about everyone else to leave, he muttered under his breath, Thank goodness it's over. Oi Deku, the loud voice of Bakugo yelled at him. Oh no, he mumbled with a sigh. He turned around in time to see the seemingly ever-furious Bakugo trudge toward him with his 2 tagalongs. Don't you ignore me, nerd, he demanded. Yes, Kakin? Izuku asked back in a neutral tone. Seeing him not reacting like a scared dog made Bakugo make an expression crossed between irritation and confusion as he asked while poking his chest. What's up with you, huh? You've been acting weirder than normal. Quieter, more reserved. You're practically not here. Hell, I've forgotten you were even still here for a few weeks. So? Izuku shrugged in reply. So? Bakugo exclaimed. So what? I'm not bothering or looking down on you like you hate so much. What's the problem? I thought you'd like that. Izuku told him with no emotion in his voice or expression on his body. Bakugo growled and exclaimed. It pisses me off. It's like you're planning something or doing something behind my back. Izuku sighs exhausted and asks back. Will nothing I do satisfy you? Whether I'm in your face or as far away as possible. You never seem happy about the result. What did you say? Bakugo yelled into his face. Izuku finches at him getting into his face, but calms himself and turns away while saying, Goodbye, Kaken. Hold it, he yelled while grabbing his collar and holding him up to his face. I'm not done with you, nerd. You're still acting weird and I want to know why, Izuku said and did nothing as Bakugo held him up, making the teen growl and yell, You'd better not still be trying to be a hero. In the past, Izuku would have been like his usual self, squeaking and cowering in fear, protecting his face from any attack. But ever since the day that Bakugo told him to, he's become completely numb to anything he could do or say. It didn't affect him anymore. The fear he had no longer controlled him. And Bakugo couldn't use it to control him either. I'm not, he said in a cold, calm voice. Well, you'd better wait, what? Bakugo suddenly fell off his anger and went straight and flabbergasted. Izuku sighs again, pulls off his hand, and yells at him. I'm not Kaken. I give up. You were right and I was wrong. You win. Happy now? I what? Why? Bakugo blabbered out while taking a step back. This time it was Izuku's turn to demand back. Why? Why do you care? You've never cared before, so why start now? Bakugo took another step backward, completely confused as to what was happening as Izuku continued. I've stopped trying to be a hero, okay? You'll never see me again. You won't have to deal with me again. Isn't that what you've wanted? Bakugo said nothing in return, just stared at him with his mouth open in shock. Izuku dropped his arms and told him, And you know what? For whatever it's worth, I'm glad I won't be seeing you again. Izuku grabbed his bag and just before walking past him, said, See you never, Kaken. After leaving the school, Izuku made a beeline straight for the newly constructed research facility. It took him about 30 minutes by foot, but only because he was thinking so much about what just happened and how it would affect things from here. But before he could get any more lost in his mind, he arrived at the front of the facility where Igon called out to him. Ah, Izuku, there you are. I and your mother were getting worried. Igon exclaimed as he waved over the boy, his mother standing beside him. Izuku turned his head after trotting over to them, saying apologetically, Sorry, I was kinda dragging my feet. Did you have a good last day? Sorry I wasn't able to come to get you. Inko apologizes to him as well. It's okay, Mom. We're here now. Izuku assures her while changing the subject. Then a sharp ahem grabbed both of their attention, and they both looked over to Igon, who had a large set of scissors, while standing in front of a large sheet of paper that covered everything in the front and front 8 feet up. Well then, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, might I present to you our brand new research facility, Igon cried out, while cutting the banner and exposing the new building for the two Midoriyas to gawk at. The building is what you would expect to see out of a research facility. A huge building with squared off everything, made of white stone from the outside, with huge glass windows and more offshoot buildings that had almost no sort of distinguished marks, nearly uniform to everything else. All except the front, which was the most creatively designed part that had stone stairs leading up to it as it stood on a raised surface. As they stood in awe of the building, Igon came up. Izuku sighed and placed a hand around his shoulder. While motioning to it, he said, Look at it, Izuku. This is the culmination of all of our hard work. Together we're going to make some big discoveries and even bigger changes. I hope to see it through as long as I can. Izuku told him with a smile. So do I. Egon agreed, while looking up at seeing a long-time part of his dream come true. Wiping a tear from his eyes, a thought crossed his mind, and he asked, "Say, what do you want to start on first?" Izuku thought for a moment, looking like he didn't want to tell, but finally opened up and said, "Well, I'd like to do more experiments with a singularity soul's radiation on plants and animals for starters." And? Egon questions him after hearing the boy fall off. Izuku shook his head and waved it off while saying, "Ah, never mind. Forget it. What about you, Professor?" Egon placed a finger to his chin and answered, "Truthfully, I'd like to figure out a name for this place." "You got anything?" Izuku thought about this for a minute before finally offering, "How about? This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting from the Neo-Icon Phoenix Research Lab, or NIP for short, performing and recording our first experimentation on the Singularity Soul and the effects of its radiation. The first subjects I will be using for this experiment are different kinds of plant life. My previous attempts at this experiment back in Professor Egon Cristallo's home were less than ideal. Allow me to explain. Since we did not have the proper technology or facilities that could amicably be used in case of some sort of emergency in which a plant becomes too dangerous, the professor had strictly forbidden me from doing multiple experiments on those of much larger plants. Instead, have me do it on smaller things such as flowers. Unfortunately, after a time of being subjected to the Singularity Soul's radiation signature for long periods, even in the most compatible conditions, they would all die within days to hours. The longest living specimen I had was a bonsai tree that only lived for about 1 week after prolonged exposure. Hopefully, in the future, I will be able to adjust the radiation from the crystal so smaller plants may be able to survive and show some sign of change. In saying that we now have far more resources and the facilities needed to combat any sort of unforeseen hiccups. Anyway, the first batch of plants I've used are as followed: 1 American cherry tree sapling, 1 crawling ivy sprout, 1 pumpkin seedling, and 1 adult American pitcher plant. Note: Professor Egon told me to not use a Venus flytrap, since it might, in his words, make an Audrey too. After planting all plants into the facility's newly constructed greenhouse, I planted 1 empty soul splinter into the soil, so the energy may be absorbed in both roots and air. In addition, I have the plants on an automatic water and light timer for max production and consistent readings for all plants in the controlled environment. I will report back when any changes are made. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting to say, that didn't take long at all. I've only been gone about 3 days and results have already been made. Massive ones. All the plants I've used in the experiment have all grown to their adult size, which explains why all the flowers I used died so quickly. The energy in the crystal didn't kill it. It aged it to a point where it died of old age. I must note this down for future use. Anyhow, as I expected, not only had the plants grown in size, but changed on a biological level. First, the American cherry tree. In addition to it growing to the size of an adult tree of its genus, it also changed color. Its leaves turned blue, its flowers a bright red, and its fruit a bright white. After a bit of testing, I found that the cherry fruits will explode like firecrackers upon being broken. However, if frozen for 20 minutes, the fruit turns a cool pink and becomes edible for human consumption. Note: they have a tart taste to them. Next is the crawling ivy. It too grew so massive and quickly that it reached out of its pot and up towards the glass roof. When I attempted to cut them back, several vines wrapped around me and began to tickle me relentlessly. After freeing myself, I took a leaf sample and saw that it was covered in a toxin response to the tickle response in our skin, using it as a defense mechanism. Note: use fire at a distance. Then we have the pumpkin. Unlike regular ones which simply grow a few pumpkins on one vine, this one grew several dozen tiny ones on a single vine and from a single flower. After some analysis, I found that not only were the new mini pumpkins the size of cherry tomatoes, but they tasted very sweet. In addition, when touched, they emit a faint purple light. After a round of different tests, I discovered that when they are broken off from the vine and blown into the stem, the pumpkin will begin to inflate like a balloon. And contrary to what I thought before, no matter if the gourd is broken, bruised, or cut, it will not deflate. It will keep its size and continue to swell up with more air pressure so long as its stem is intact. I even put it through a high-powered air press pump and made it swell up to 14 inches in diameter. I would have let it go longer, but I theorize it may not have a size limit. Note: this could help the worldwide hunger crisis. And finally, the American pitcher plant. Boy, did this one change. Not only did it asexually reproduce, but grew far bigger than any currently known pitcher plant species. In addition, it gains several larger back leaves and a new set of vibrant colors on said leaves and its body. Its innards make a very sweet and insisting aromatic that even I was drawn to. When I got within 30 ft of the plants, they began to rustle and bristle their leaves. As they did so, the waving and vibrating colors began to induce a sort of hypnotic effect. And with the sweet smell dampening my senses, I began to walk toward it. Luckily, I managed to break out just in time. Though even if I had gotten too close to the plants, they were still far too small for me to fit in, and couldn't move any other part. Note: I'm really glad I listened to the professor's no Venus flytrap rule. From this data alone, I now have several working theories on what may have happened. I will attempt one more mass test and see what happens from there. I will update again when I have started the process. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting again on the next round of experiments. So a day has passed, and I've set up the next round of experiments. This time I used a corn seed, a potato sprout, a garlic clove, a carrot seed, and 2 different types of cactus trimmings. More specifically, a golden beryl and saguaro. I will report back when the results have been made. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting once more to bring an update on the new rounds of plants and their effects under the Singularity Soul's radiation. And like last time, it came quickly. I'll start in the order I listed in my last report. First, the corn. Like all the others, it grew to full maturity in just a few days, and surprisingly sprouted the same amount of ears it normally does. However, when I opened one of them up, the corn kernels were colored and reflective like glass. When brought up to sunlight, they reflected it very similarly to how a magnifying glass would, and I had to quickly cover it up before it shot rays of deadly sunlight at me. In addition, I found that when dropped, whether in or out of the leaves, the corn kernels would explode and scatter like a hand-thrown grenade. Note: attempts at making popcorn are now prohibited. Then the potato. I was surprised to see it was one of the few that didn't change externally. I had wondered what it could do until I placed my phone next to it, and it began to charge from the wireless function. After a bit of tests, I found out that its natural electrical charge had been amped up tenfold, and now it was like an industrial battery, no matter its size. Note: food made with it has an electric taste to it. Next, the garlic. When I pulled it out, I almost thought it wasn't ripe because it was green. Then I found out it was when I accidentally ripped off the stem, and it quickly changed from green to yellow, then orange, and finally red. I figured out what was going on after yellow and threw it. After it hit red, it exploded into a gas compound that irritates the throat when inhaled and smells bad. Luckily, I was close to the airflow controls before it could hit me. Note: I'm guessing onions would be the same, but with tear gas instead. Now the carrot. It's gold. That's it. Solid gold. But it's edible and can be eaten raw. And surprisingly, it acts like a revitalizer in a video game. I was at my 5th cup of coffee when I ate one and felt all my exhaustion disappear. Note: don't try to trade it in for money. And finally, we have the 2 cacti. The golden beryl has turned black with pink flowers, and the saguaro now has skin that seemed to be some sort of natural metal. The golden beryl can shoot its spines when disturbed. It then turns golden and regrows all its spines before turning back again. If it's disturbed while trying to regrow its missing spines, it'll spray a nasal irritant from any flowers it has that causes uncontrollable sneezing fits. As for the saguaro, it has grown twice the size of its normal kind and even wider. It has lost all its spines and now turned a metallic gray. It's made of metal. When tested, it was the same strength as both military and construction-grade metal. In addition, when a piece of the cactus was removed, it would quickly regenerate the missing pieces. However, removing a piece is the hard part, as I had to cut it off with a cutting torch. Note: don't drink the water inside. Upon careful study of what I've seen and made, one of my theories happens to be right. The radiation of the Singularity Soul caused these plants to develop quirks. It's rare in animals, but in plants, it's unheard of. Anyhow, this is unheard of. This is massive. And this could change everything we know about the world and science in general. So does that mean our evolution and the emergence of Quirk was all thanks to radiation? If so, it couldn't have been from this one single specimen. There must be more. A huge vein somewhere. We'll have to figure that out at a later date. When I gave my findings to Egon, I expected him to be excited and not go into cardiac arrest from shock. It was a fun day with the paramedics. Anyhow, I will be taking a break from the plant-based tests and moving on to animal tests to truly see what the radiation can accomplish. If it can cause evolution or quirks, I have to find out how. I will find out how. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya signing off for now. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting on the newest Singularity Soul experiment at the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility. To recap from my last round of tests, in short, I subjected several different plants in the same controlled environment to the radiation given off by the crystal through an empty splinter. In short, I found that the radiation causes rapid aging and the appearance of quirks, which is a world-shattering piece of news on its own. Anyhow, my next target is to see whether the same thing happens to animals. The reason I test this, and not just conclude it, despite the existence of several animals with quirks, is the fact of what happened the first time I tried it. In short, I used an empty splinter, a different one, on a pigeon, and turned it into a dodo. Was that the quirk, or did evolution take hold? That's why I'm testing it. On a side note, the one dodo that I showed to Professor Egon has hence been adopted by us and made the honorary facility mascot and pet. We call him Pete. Continuing with my experiments, I have since marked off a few testing rooms and chambers in the animal testing to accomplish this. Now I know what you're thinking, but don't worry. We make sure that all the creatures used are not tortured in any way. They live no different lives than house pets. Having said that, I decided to start small and use an order male ant farm. After some words with Professor Egon, he convinced me to do it behind a sealed chamber door lined with thick metal. On the chance they turn into giant monster ants. With that, I set a splinter beside them and waited. Luckily, I didn't have to wait long, since they all died a few hours later. I can only guess that, like the flowers and their ages, they were unable to withstand the radiation and overaged to death. I'll have to use something a bit bigger. So for the next set of experiment, I have decided to use two different subjects, a common pet store goldfish and a koi fish. Both subjects were placed in the same divided aquarium with a splinter in their vicinity. I will report once any changes have been made. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting again. The results have finally been made with the two fish after just 3 days. In short, the pet store goldfish is dead unsurprisingly, and the koi fish now shimmers when exposed to direct sunlight. Note: these could make for good decoration at the entryway of the research facility. From this, I can only conclude that the effects of the radiation are entirely dependent on the size of the creature, and not what kind of creature it is. The next round of experiments will be subjected to amphibians and birds. I will report back as soon as I have everything set up. Okay, I finally managed to get my hands on all the necessary animals needed for this next test. This time I am using two vastly different kinds of animals, all of varying sizes, amphibians and birds. For the amphibians, I am using an axolotl, a giant salamander, and a newt. As for the birds, I am once again using the wild pigeons around Japan, a chicken, a budgie, and a peacock. In addition, I will also be testing an octopus that was accidentally sent alongside the 3 amphibians. Once again, I have put all the animals in different testing chambers in all the same controlled environments. The amphibians were allowed in the same tank, but divided, all except the octopus, who was put in a completely separate tank. I have placed an empty splinter within their vicinity. The birds were all placed in different enclosures in the same testing chamber, divided off for their safety. An empty splinter was placed within their vicinity. I'll report back once any signs of change are seen. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting some amazing news about the most recent experiments. I don't even know where to start, or even how to put this reporting down into any coherence. But first, I'll just start with how most of the experiments went before I get on to the amazing discovery. I periodically checked on all the creatures once every day. No signs had been made until about the 2nd and 4th day, respectively. First, I will be starting with the amphibians and the octopus. The axolotl has gained the ability to control water and can move freely from its tank. It's a good thing I checked in on it periodically, because I think the radiation was starting to get to it, and it was using its newfound quirk to move away from the splinter. Note: make a covered and watertight tank. Then the giant salamander. Surprisingly, it has shown no signs of a quirk. I am not sure if it's simply immune to the effects of the radiation, or if some creatures like humans cannot develop quirks, or if it is simply evolutionarily perfect. Either way, it remains the same no matter how much time has passed. Note: it's sort of nice to know that some creatures can be quirkless. Next, the newt. It's dead. Surprisingly, however, this isn't due to the radiation from the splinter. It was actually due to its own developed quirk. I'm not sure what it was, but it just exploded. Note: study remains to see what happened. Last of all was the octopus. It showed no physical changes, except for its brain. The radiation has caused its brain, which normally wraps around its esophagus, to disconnect and become separate in the body, allowing it to swell up to 3 times its normal capacity. This also includes many more wrinkles in the brain. In short, it got smarter, a lot smarter. So smart that it now has a minor form of sentience and sapience. The way I found this out is when it asked me, in Morse code, to give back the crystal so it could continue to grow. I'm both extremely intrigued and extremely scared of what that could mean. For now, I denied its request and placed it into a new aquarium to be studied. Note: learn Morse code. After this are the birds. The first one is the peacock. Somehow it hypnotizes with its tail. False fact had come true. When raising and shaking its tail feathers, it induces a hypnotic effect, so long as eye contact is met constantly. I was fortunate enough that it dropped its tail and ran as I approached. Note: make hypnotic-proof goggles. Then the budgie. It didn't change externally like the peacock, but instead its vocals did. The bird can now mimic any sound it heard perfectly, and at the decibels it sounds at, apart from speech. I've tested gunshots, car keys, bells, the bark of a dog, the grunts of peat, the flicking of a light switch, the buzz of electricity, and the honk of a tuba. I even gave it a rendition of one of Mozart's symphonies, and it copied it perfectly with all instruments present. My one mistake was allowing it to hear my ringtone, and now it pranks me by making the same noise. I've come to find out its intelligence has grown to that of an American gray parrot. Note: change ringtones. Next is the chicken. It's by far the strangest one yet. Its brain has quadrupled in size. It's so large that it stretches the skin on its head to the point it's nearly translucent. I honestly wonder how it's still able to stand and walk, let alone still be alive. I'm honestly still wondering what happened to its skull, if it still has it. As I'm sure you can guess, in addition to having one of the largest brain-to-body sizes in the history of his species and every animal on Earth, It has an equally numerous amount of wrinkles in its brain. This is as smart, if not smarter than most people. Note: she has been able to speak with me through a text-to-speech generator and has formally asked for a job. Last of all is the pigeon. I was most surprised by this since it didn't change into a dodo as I expected. It only gains a quirk similar to that of the hero hawks. It can shoot, control, and reattach its feathers in addition to being able to give off a faint white glow. I was honestly baffled by this, so I'll do some more experimenting and see what happens from there. Note: don't let any religious fanatics see it. This is Dr. Izuku, oh forget it. This is too important for formalities. I've made a breakthrough since my last report. I truly underestimated the power of the singularity soul. It's more powerful than I could have imagined. Maybe I should stop gushing and get to the point. So finding that a pigeon was given a quirk instead of being turned into a pigeon made me wonder about something. What did I do differently that caused it to change so drastically? So after a bit, I figured it out and decided to run the same pigeon test, this time with 2 different empty splinters. The first one was the splinter I used to test the plants and animals, and the second was the one I originally used to turn the pigeons into dodos for money. I placed both in the vicinity of 2 pigeons in different testing chambers, and after a few days, the same thing happened. One changed into a dodo, and the other gained the same quirk as the first test subject. This led me to 2 different discoveries, the first being that any creature or plant of the same type, except for humans, will always have the same quirk. The second thing is the energy fluctuations in the splinters cause different effects. The way I found this out is by taking the splinters and running them under an energy wavelength reader. I found out that the quirk splinter was positively charged, while the evolution splinter was negatively charged. So depending on what frequency it's at, and how much was put into each splinter, a fact I found out later, depends on what effect it gives off. I wonder if that also translates to whatever the splinter absorbs. Maybe I can even control the frequency of the energy to see what other effects they have. Different experiments for different days. So I tested this once more and used 2 female sheep. I kept them in separate testing chambers with the same controlled environment, and both splinters in each room. I'll report back on my findings. Okay, the tests are a full success, and have brought up another important piece of information on the radiation effect. These are my full findings on each subject. The sheep that had the quirk splinter did develop a quirk, some form of electrokinesis. It can generate electricity through its wool to do several things. It can release the pent-up energy at will, use it to increase its speed, create a force field, and electricity charge ions in the air, allowing it to float and air walk. It's also gained a taste for sugar and tobacco, not sure why. When sheared and proceeded into clothes, it had a very tingly feeling to it. When its meat is cooked and eaten, it has the same effect as the clothes with no abnormal signs, but is perfectly safe. Note: many of them could cause thunderstorms or power a small town. The sheep that had the evolution splinter did something unexpected. Instead of devolving into another less evolved species of sheep, like a wild one, it instead evolved. Instead of a wild sheep, before humans domesticated them, there stood a much larger, leaner, smarter, and more muscular sheep. I almost thought it was a wolf or I had gone into the wrong room, but it was the same one. Its legs grew longer with a bigger chest and had a body structure like a predator. Its wool was like regular hair. Its eyes gingerly moved somewhat to the front of the face. Its hooves split into 3 toe-like claws, and its horns now grew up before curving and shooting straight out. After briefly observing it, I almost assumed it was turned into a carnivore. But after feeding, I found it to still be an herbivore. When approached, it acted much more aggressively than a normal sheep that would act curious or scared. When the wool was sheared, it acted like hair and came off piece by piece. When the meat was eaten, it was extremely tough and gamey. Note: it reminds me of an old anime my mom and I watched as a kid. I was truly baffled as to how and why this happened, and then I found out the reason. When I gave both sheep a physical exam, I discovered they both were under a lot of stress. I guess the move from an open field to an enclosed lab, coupled with the lack of noise and social interactions between their kind, set it to skyrocket. That's when I realized what the radiation had done. Due to its stress, the radiation caused it to evolve into something that could handle stress more easily in a predator-heavy environment. That's why it looks and acts more aggressively and like a predator. So any external forces could cause a major change in the subject's change. That's why the pigeons turned into dodo. They were so calm and in a predator-free and food-rich environment that they devolved into something more suited for such a lifestyle. I can only guess what else it could do. Okay, so I have a bit of a dilemma or situation. While I was testing and observing the sheep, the semi-intelligent octopus snuck out of its aquarium and stole the Quirk splinter. When I finally found where it was when it was his feeding time, I had to act fast. But the fastest I could go was 2 hours, since it took me a full hour to get him out of his tanks, and then another hour to pry it from his tentacles. Who knows how long he had it. Luckily, he didn't turn into a giant monster octopus like I thought. He just grew smarter, way smarter. The way I found this out is when I came in the next day, and he was sitting at my desk in a glass bowl filled with water and typing at my computer with text-to-speech. Does he want to work for the facility? I'm not sure why, but I didn't deny him that. I'll have to set something up with him, the chicken, and the professor. He can understand human speech and just can't speak it, much like the chicken. I guess they'll be my future co-workers. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya, signing off for now. Note: they both have given themselves names. The chicken has called herself Dr. Cluck Orpington, and the octopus has called himself Professor Otto Cephalopod. Okay, I'm sorry. Run this by me one more time, Egon asked his employee as he took off his glasses to rub his eyes. Sitting in front of the professor were two animals sitting in separate and tall chairs. The first was a white leghorn hen with a brain so massive, it looked like it would belong to an overly sarcastic portrayal of a super evil genius. The second was a male Pacific giant octopus who looked normal, but was holding itself up on its right tentacle. Even its eyes were far more expressive. Both animals were hooked up to a large machine that had something connected to their heads. According to Izuku, it was some kind of translator he made for them since they couldn't speak. After taking a breath and putting his glasses back on, he laced his fingers, put his chin on them, and started. You did experiments on animals? Yep, Izuku replied. You used a chicken and octopus, respectively, Egon continued. Yep, Izuku confirmed. During which, they both gained human-level thought and understanding. He motions to the two animals. They do, Izuku admitted. And now they are looking for employment here? Egon asked, while pointing to his desk with both hands. Yes, as if the boy just didn't get through explaining that the first time around, clucked Dr. Orpington through the translator. Hush. It's a lot to take in all at once. Professor Cephalopod barked at her through the machine. Egon looked at Izuku and told him, Shinkoko, I think I should start watching over your experiments. Dr. Orpington squawked and argued. If anything, you should be giving him more freedom. Why is it just a month and a half? He managed to find out perhaps one of the many secrets to evolution and quirks as a whole. Egon sighs and tells her. Normally I would be, and I should be. But I just can't get over you two and your desires. What's so strange? Professor Cephalopod asked back. You want to work here, for us, at this very facility? Egon firmly asked them. Were we not clear? Dr. Orpington asked back, a bit irritated. Egon shakes his head and admits, I just don't get it. What's not to get? You need workers, and we want to work, Professor Cephalopod argued. If anything, we crave it, Dr. Orpington excitedly exclaimed. Yeah, but you're animals, Egon begrudgingly told them. So are you, stated Professor Cephalopod. Getting a bit irritated yet still holding his nerves, he argues. No, Well, yes. That's not what I'm trying to get at here. I'm just saying that it seems kind cruel. How so? Dr. Orpington asked. Egon pushes away his hair, deep in thought before trying to explain. Look, you're animals, so you don't have rights like we do. You're not like us. We think like you, Professor Cephalopod states. That's different, Egon yells while slamming his hand on his desk, finally losing his cool, causing the two animals and teens to jump. Calming himself down and leaning back in his chair, he takes a sip of his cold coffee before explaining. Look, I don't want to say no, but we as a species have had our higher intelligence for the past few 100,000 years. You two gained it through external means just a few days ago. The rules aren't going to just change for you two right away. Trust me on that. What are you trying to say? Inquisitively asked Professor Cephalopod. Egon sighs, fearing having to explain this, and tells them. We bought you, made you live here, and did experiments that heightened your awareness. We own you, and now you're saying you want to work for us. How am I supposed to pay you? Shrimp and corn. What would two animals, with no concept of money, even want with it? To me, it seems more like servitude, animal cruelty even. You'd have to live here full time, and that just doesn't seem right. So you're concerned about the morality of the situation? Professor Cephalopod inquired. The two creatures looked at one another, smiled or something that resembled it, and Dr. Orpington spoke on behalf of both of them. You truly are a good man, Professor. Also, not sure if you're aware, but you two have stupidly short lifespans. Egon admits to them with an uncomfortable expression on his face. Doctor, you'll only live about 10 years if you're lucky. And Professor, you'll live for only half of that. And if you mate, forget it. Plus you both are already adults of your respective species, so you don't have much time. He tells them in a serious tone. Izuku spoke out once again and informed him. Actually, I did some tests, and it turns out that in addition to their intelligence being more human, they also have lifespans that are similar. Egon blinks, his body posture becoming more calm as he says, while pointing at the professor. Well, that solves that problem, but no sex for you. I will restrain myself. The professor agreed, doing a mock salute. As for our payment, food and boarding are nice, but perhaps we can use the company funds for our interest from time to time. Dr. Orpington offered. Egon took out a paper and pen from his messy desk, and writing it down he tells her. That does sound like a good trade-off. But if you two want to buy something, you'll have to bring it up with me first, and I'll give the green or red light on it. That sounds perfectly fair. She agrees alongside a nod from the professor. Egon then looks up from his writing and tells them. Just one other thing. Neither of you is a doctor or professor respectfully. Well, you're not a professor, Dr. Egon. Professor Cephalopod gurgles a laugh while vexing him. Professor rolls off the tongue better. Egon pouts before wiping a hand across his face and telling them. Fine, fine, just do some online courses in your free time. The two agree and Egon shakes a wing and tentacle while saying, Welcome to the team. One day in the research facility, Izuku knocked lightly on Professor Egon's door. He heard the knock and judging by the sound of it, whatever Izuku had to tell him wasn't good. So he waited till he came in, and after a minute the door was lightly cracked open with Izuku peeking his head inside and looking like a guilty dog. Hey, Professor, Izuku called. Yeah? Egon called back, face deep in paperwork. Izuku slid inside, fidgeted uncomfortably, and said, figure out how to make the splinters into permanent evolution and devolution ones. I also found out that when two creatures of the same or very similar species are brought in together, in terms of DNA, and used as a catalyst, it will cause that creature to evolve into the provided DNA structure. Almost instantly his worries dissolved, and he exclaimed in zeal, That's amazing. How'd you figure it out? Izuku looked away and fidgeted once more. Egon felt his excitement fade, and he asked, How'd you figure it out? Izuku looked over to the side while smiling nervously. Egon sat up and exclaimed, his excitement replaced with worry as he firmly asked, Izuku, what did you do? Before he could force himself to answer, the answer pushed itself through the door, and Izuku had to quickly hold it back. Egon was so shocked by what he saw that he almost passed out right there. After calming himself down, he looked at his coffee mug and poured it out into a nearby plant. Please tell me the caffeine is finally getting to me, Egon begged as Izuku answers with a slow head shake. Egon put the mug down, takes a deep breath, and says, Okay, from what you've just told me, I have 2 questions. Question number 1. He then explodes as he yells them instantly calms down. Where did you get a baby elephant? And question 2. He explodes again, but more in a self-agonizing way as he demands. How did you get mammoth DNA? Izuku scratches his head as he holds the baby mammoth by its trunk and explains. I called up a paleontology research facility, and they happen to have a lot of mammoth bone bits that they used for carbon dating. I convinced them, and they managed to give me one. He then looks away while rubbing his head as the baby sucks his fingers, and he finally explains. As for how I got a baby elephant. Yes? Egon firmly prompts him. I bought it off the black market, Izuku said quickly while hunching into himself. You what? Egon yells so loud that he knocks himself over, and he falls to the floor. I paid out of my own pocket with cash, Izuku tried to reassure him quickly. Egon jumps from the floor and bolts at Izuku. Grabbing his shoulders, he exclaimed to his face. That's not what I'm angry about. You went on what I can only hope to be an illegal website with a throwaway computer and purchased a nearly extinct species of animal. Behind my back. Are you out of your mind? Izuku tried to open his mouth, but the words got caught as Egon continued his scolding. What if you got scammed or hacked or killed or something even worse? Izuku looked away and Egon forced his head to look at him, to which he stated, Izuku, listen to me and listen to me very carefully. I am all for taking risks and getting messy in the name of science and for the good of its community. But you must know that there is a line that you mustn't cross, and what you did today just showed that you crossed it. On the verge of tears, Izuku whimpered out, I'm sorry. Egon pulled away from the frightened boy and told him seriously, Science, creation, and discovery aren't all about what you can do, but whether or not you should do it. That's what separates scientists from mad scientists. I'm sorry, Izuku squeaked out once more, trying to hold it all back. For your sake, I really hope you are, Egon told him while sitting back in his chair and letting out a stressed breath. After they both calmed down. Anyway, at the end of the day, you did bring back an extinct species into the modern era. Something that the greatest minds have failed to do for centuries. For that, I must commemorate you. But we speak nothing of this to the public. They are not ready, and neither are we. Izuku nods in agreement as Egon follows up. Also, why did it have to be a mammoth? You couldn't have chosen to revive something a bit less dangerous. Izuku blinks, then lists off on his fingers. Would you have preferred I revived the giant killer-toothed tiger, the giant killer sloth, the giant killer rhino, the giant killer bird that runs, the giant killer bird that flies, the giant killer pig, the giant killer hyena, the giant killer lion, the giant killer bear, or the giant killer? Egon cut him off and half yelled. Okay, I get it. You choose the least bad option, and the only one you would have easy availability. But don't do this again. Izuku quickly nods while looking at the ground in shame. Egon then goes to his phone and dials up a number while telling the teen, I'll call Ururoka Construction Co. to make an enclosure for it. Then I'll make arrangements to turn it into a climate-controlled area. I'm placing you in full charge of its responsibility and care. As he told Izuku this, the baby mammoth began chewing on one of the decorative plants and knocked over a huge stack of papers that did not entertain the professor in the slightest. Yes, sir. Izuku quickly agreed while heading the baby mammoth out of the room while closing the door. Once gone, Egon held the phone against his ear and shoulder, while rubbing his temples and saying to him as the phone rang, "Shaw, that kid needs to stop getting so excited and jumping headfirst into things. He's got a head on his shoulders. He should use it. He is seriously going to hurt himself someday." Professor Egon sat at his desk, with Dr. Orpington sitting across from him as she showed off her newest invention. A proud look on her beak. A rocket launcher of sorts that looked like it came straight out of a cartoon with bright colors and funny chicken stickers. He looks between the hyper-intelligent bird and the weapon before taking off his thick glasses to rub his eyes. "Okay, so run this by me again. You made what?" Egon asks after putting his glasses back in his face. "An egg cannon." The doctor told him with her new smaller translator that was wrapped around her massive brain. "Why?" Egon prompted her. "For shooting eggs, of course," the doctor explained. "What purpose does this serve?" Egon asks back. "No purpose. It's just fun. Work can't be work all the time," Dr. Orpington told him with a chipper cluck. "Okay, but making this doesn't bother you?" Egon asked with a cautious and worried tone. "Not really," she admitted. "You a chicken making a cannon that shoots eggs?" Egon asked, while motioning to the device with all his fingers. "Yes," she replied happily. Egon shook his head, seeing that she wasn't getting what he was implying, so he told her more forwardly. "Okay, so this is the equivalent of me making a baby cannon." "Well, that wouldn't be efficient at all," the doctor said back, making Egon raise an eyebrow until she followed up saying nonchalantly, "Besides, you'd have to wait 9 months to reload." "Doctor," Egon half yelled at her in disgust and shock. "What?" she exclaimed back. "It's wrong. You're using your unfertilized children as ammunition and blasting them at terminal velocity. Doesn't that bother you?" he told her bluntly. She shook her head and replied, "No more than you eating my uncooked children does." Egon stopped as he was halfway to his mouth with a breakfast egg sandwich. Placing it down, he said aloud, "Sometimes I forget that chickens are psychopathic, homicidal, cannibalistic omnivores." The doctor said nothing to him in reply and simply stared, making the professor relent and say, "Fine, fine, I'll allow it. But no fertilized one. Got it." "Understood," she agreed while hopping on a strange machine. It looked like a waiter's cart, but heavily modified and metal. It had a steering mechanism for the doctor to drive around using her feet, and had 2 robotic arms that she could control with a touchpad using her beak. The 2 robotic arms grabbed the egg cannon and placed it on the cart before she maneuvered the machine out of the room. Just before leaving, she nearly bumped into Izuku as he walked in and cordially greeted, "Dr. Izuku." "Dr. Orpington." Izuku greeted her back before the two went on their ways. Standing in the doorway and knocking on the frame, Izuku asked, "Professor, are you busy?" "No, no, come in, Izuku." Egon waved the boy in, motioning to a seat. Once he sat down, Egon laced his fingers and asked, "So what horrors have you birthed today?" Izuku was shocked by the allegation and tried to argue, "I didn't." Only for Egon to chuckle and tell him, "I'm just messing with you. But before you tell me what it is, I have some questions." Izuku sat quietly as Egon took a breath and listed off. "Is it dangerous, alive, sentient, or potentially world-ending?" "No," Izuku answered back. "Did you do anything dirty, underhanded, illegal, or behind my back?" Egon gave him a look. "No," Izuku exclaimed back, a bit irritated and hurt. Egon sat back, smiled, and told him, "Then all of my concerns have been satisfied. What did you make or do, and don't leave out any?" Though he stopped himself after remembering what he was told the last time he asked that. So he backtracked and told him, "On second thought, just give me the main points." Izuku nods before taking out his notebook and exclaiming excitedly, "Okay, so I was doing some tests on the empty splinters, and I made a huge discovery." Hearing his excitement and seeing his smile, Egon wanted to jump up, but opted to simply ask back in equal excitement. What is it, baby? What? So you know how you have all those cell samples from every part of your body, Izuku started. Only for Professor Cephalode, who was walking by with his new translator on his head and a cup of coffee, to overhear their conversation, stop in his tracks, peek his head in, and ask in confusion and concern. Samples of what now from every part of your what? Egon shrugged at him and replied, why bother spending money on muscle, skin, and brain stem cells when you get them directly from a self-made source? I wondered why you were covered in so many injuries and scars. The professor commented back suspiciously, while narrowing his eyes and taking a sip. Izuku then interjected in their conversion and continued. Anyhow, I put them all into a vial with a splinter, and you'll never believe what happened. Egon sat there waiting for an answer, and finally exclaimed, well, don't leave me in suspense. Tell me. It made a copy of your quirk, Izuku finally admitted, only for Egon to fall right out of his chair. Oh my god. Professor Egon went into cardiac arrest again, Izuku yelled in fear. Again? Yelled Dr. Orpington from down the hall. I'll get the defibrillator, Professor Cephalode offered while rolling his eyes. I'm okay. I just fell off my seat. Edgin shot up an arm from behind his desk to calm their worries. Once he stood back up and breathed, he stated in disbelief. I don't even know what to say. Are you sure? Izuku produced a splinter from his coat pocket and held it up from the sea. Looking at the splinter, it didn't have the same glowing white effect that a normal one does. More of a prism bending light shines on it. A fact Egon observed aloud. A different glow. Then, without warning, Izuku gripped the crystal, and from his opposite hand, Izuku produced the same kind of crystal that Egon makes to create the splinters. In shock, Egon says nothing except stare until he finally babbles out. Wait a second, that's my quirk. He then looks at the splinter and asks Izuku, is this from? Izuku nodded before he could finish, and Egon went to sit back in his chair. After polishing the rest of his coffee off, he pushed back his hair and asked after absorbing that all answer, what was different from the blood and medicine splinters. I even used some of my blood for the AB plus splinter, and it didn't show any signs of my quirk. DNA. Pure DNA, right here. Izuku told him with an excited smile as he pulled out a vial that had a mixed red and blue color in it with bits of white. It took Egon a few minutes to digest what he just told him as he took the vial and looked it over like a child looking through a kaleidoscope. After a bit, the thought finally dawned on him, and he observed aloud once more. This is a vial filled with my genetic code. Egon then jumped from his feet, grabbed Izuku in a hug, and spun him around while stating, Izuku, this is incredible. You just made and discovered the two greatest things in probable history. Izuku couldn't help but feel happy for this, and had to resist the urge to cry out in joy with him. But suddenly Egon stopped his revelry and asked him, while still holding him, but if you used the DNA samples I collected from my whole body to make the one you have, why do you have this? He asked while motioning to the veil. Izuku then explained to him, well, after I made the splinter with your quirk, I thought, I wonder what happens if I make one with pure DNA that doesn't take the form of anything else in the body. After I figured out how to extract all the DNA, I put it in another splinters. And how about I just show you? He offered while bringing the professor to a small room in the facility. The room itself wasn't anything special. There was almost nothing in it apart from a small table that had a large and ever-growing crystal on top of it. Every so often when it got too big, a set of robotic arms came down from the ceiling and broke off huge pieces of it that fell into a suction vent that sucked it into a single corner of the room. In this corner was a machine that would take every individual shard, then cut, shape, and polish it in a uniform before sending it down a short conveyor belt and into a box with many others. After looking over the machines and the box full of crystals ready to be made into empty splinters, He made his way to the ever-growing crystal. Inside the very center was a splinter that looked exactly like the one Izuku used to demonstrate. Looking at the boy, the man could only say in a low, flabbergasted voice, "Whoa. It's even more potent than this one since the strain was pure." Izuku explained to him with a big smile. "But why make this one?" Egon prompted him. Izuku looked down while shuffling his feet as he explained, "You already do so much for the facility on top of making every splinter we have. I just thought it would be good to give you a break in at least one regard. And besides, what if you get sick or hurt? And when you die, this place will probably shut down." Egon smiles softly at him. Ruffling his hair, he tells him, "Thanks for that, Izuku. You are a good kid with a good heart. Just have to make that head a little less fuzzy," he says while playfully pinching his nose. Before they could continue this comfortable moment, a shrill voice squealed out of the room. "Dr. Izuku." Both men rushed outside into the main foyer where they saw three things. Professor Cephalopod leaned on a wall and watched something in amusement as he drank his coffee. Dr. Orpington's cart was knocked over, and the doctor was being chased around the room by the baby mammoth, now called Gammoth, in a one-sided game of chase. "Call off your beast at once," the doctor squealed in urgency as she tried and failed to flap away. "He's just playing with you," Professor Cephalopod called back teasingly. "I'm an adult weighing in at 13 pounds with hollow bones and a nearly exposed brain. He's a few moments old and already weighs in at 200 pounds. He'll kill me," he crowed at him as Izuku ran up and grabbed Gammoth before he could catch her like a child attempting to catch pigeons at the park. Once safely secure, the doctor ruffled her feathers and demanded, "Keep that thing on a leash." Otto just bubbled up a laugh and walked off to his office as Egon helped to flip her moving device back up and get out of the foyer while Izuku still had the baby. Once gone, Izuku let go of Gammoth where he stood by his side. "Izuku." Egon said the boy's name as he walked up to him and said before stopping again, "With this discovery you've made, are you thinking what I'm thinking? I'll make up flyers and posts on social media. I'll also separate a small portion of the facility's money as an incentive for all volunteers," Professor Cephalopod said from a bit down the hallway, waving a tentacle inside the foyer. "Thank you, Professor," Egon called back before tiling Izuku excitedly. "Now we have a whole new avenue to discover." This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting once again with a new round of experiments with the Singularity Soul and more specifically the splinters. I'll spare the details since I made it in a different report, directly to Professor Egon. But in short, I was able to extract pure DNA and place it into an empty splinter, thus allowing me to copy a quirk. So far I have only made a copy of Professor Egon's quirk as a means of producing more splinters. I have also found out that much like the blood and medical splinters, when activated with a mental quest, I can produce the quirk as if it were my very own. I can put a quirk in a bottle, in a manner of speaking. Though this brings up a new thought. Wouldn't putting a pure extract of a person just make that splinter into said person, just in crystal form? Then why does a person's quirk become the main factor in the splinter? The only theory I could come up with was that a quirk was something entirely different from the rest of the body. Something that lies in DNA but beyond it. And I believe that something to be the soul. Our quirks are internally meshed with our souls, or at least fragments of them. So in essence, I'm either taking a piece or copying a person's soul with this. Though as you can imagine, that theory has many holes, especially since the Singularity Soul can cause quirks to emerge. So more tests will have to be done in that regard. Anyhow, after finding and telling this discovery, Professor Egon, with the help of Professor Cephalopod, was able to do a bit of marketing to get volunteers for this experiment. Luckily, the process was easy, and all the volunteers had to do was give their name, age, quirk, and a description of it. Surprisingly, we got over several dozen volunteers. Of course, a lot of that came from the $100 volunteer award. Either way, We have tons of blood samples to work with. The only problem is extracting enough DNA to make a pure Quirk splinter. I know what and how to do it, but I don't have it down to a complete science just yet. I'll report back with more results. This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting once again on the Quirk splinter creation process. After 2 painstaking weeks of grinding, I have finally extracted all the DNA from each blood sample to infuse in the empty splinters. And in that time, I think I have the process down to a science. Now I just gotta make a machine to do it for me. But forgetting about my gripes, during one of my sleepless nights, I made an accidental discovery. When placing DNA into one of the vials I use for the absorption process, I accidentally placed 2 different DNA samples into the same one. 5 days later, and out came a splinter with a perfect combination of both quirks, making a new one entirely. After looking through my records, I found out that both DNA samples I used were from 2 twins with different quirks. After finding this out, I did some more tests, and this is what I've discovered. Quirks are just as much a part of our DNA as hair, skin, and eye color, and as such can be used to mix and match into different or strong ones. For example, DNA samples from direct relatives, such as twins, siblings, and first cousins can be mixed easily. Samples from parents and children can be mixed, but with far less efficiency, or just simply strengthen the original quirk. Samples made from strangers or 2 people of the same gender have a 0% success rate of melding together, except for when the quirks in question are very similar. For example, if one person has a quirk that can produce a kerosene gel and another has a quirk that can ignite anything flammable, then the result would be a flame body quirk. As for 2 different quirks making a completely different quirk, like in the case of the twins, one twin can sprout a pair of wings, and the other can control the wind. Thus, the result is the ability to make wings of the air and control it. As for a quirk being mixed between mother and child, imagine the mother having a quirk that produces the chemical compound glycerin, and the child can produce explosions. The result would be the explosion quirk becoming even more powerful than it might already be. From this process, I was, and am able to make hundreds of new splinters. My only other question is if I can triple the combinations or even take 4, make 2, and then combine those. This will require more testing, so for now this is Dr. Izuku Midoriya signing off for now. Thank you for seeing me despite your busy schedule, Professor Egon. Professor Cephalopod thanked his employer as he sat at a seat across from his desk. Accompanying him was Dr. Orpington. Sitting at his desk, Egon waved him off and graciously told him, "Of course, Professor Cephalopod. Now what was it you wanted to show me?" Accompanying him was Izuku, who was asked by the octopus to join in the reveal, and Pete, who was eating out of a food bowl by the edge of his office desk. Otto stood in his seat and started to explain. As I'm sure you're very aware, the one thing this facility lacks is security. Now don't get me wrong, cameras, locks, silent alarms, and bulletproof glass are all well and good. But with what we're doing, we need to be creative on how to hide and protect our assets. Catch them with their pants down, if you get my meaning. He told him while pacing back and forth while talking like a drill sergeant. Getting tired of the theatrics already, Egon sighs and prompts him firmly. Yes, just tell me what you've made. The professor hops off his seat and skittles over to an object covered in a sheet that he had brought in. Grabbing it, he announces while ripping it away. Presenting the Mimikyu. Sitting, there was an ordinary lockbox made of standard grade metal. The sight of this did not impress either Egon or Izuku, who looked more disappointed and exasperated. A metal lockbox? Egon observed, while shifting his glasses down to glance at the professor. It's much more than that. Go ahead, put something in it. Otto offered. Izuku and Egon looked at one another, shrugged, and Izuku picked up the empty food bowl from Pete. Bringing the bowl over as the dodo honked in disapproval, the box suddenly sprang open with a mass of teeth and a long tongue snagging it up and swallowing it whole. After licking its lid, it burped. "Whoa!" cried Izuku as he whipped his hand away. Egon sprang from his seat and scooped up Izuku, pulling him out of the perceived danger, while Pete honked in fear and ran under Egon's desk. "It's alive," he yelled before making a realization and asking Otto in a small voice. "It's alive," to which he nodded. "How did you make this?" Izuku asks as he hides in the living box from behind Egon. "I mutated a Colorpa taxifolia with human flesh alongside several different Quirk splinters that have been made recently by yours truly," he explained with his ego showing. "What a blowhard," Dr. Orpington commented with an eye roll. Upon which a large flesh-like mass with teeth and eyes where they shouldn't be was born with a subconscious similar to that of a cat. "I placed it in that lockbox as a means of temporary holding, but it seems to have bonded and made the box a part of its body. After a few more tests and experiments, the Mimikyu was born," he explained further in excitement and self-pride. Egon looks between the octopus, the box, and back to the octopus as he asks, "Okay, but how are we to use this thing?" Professor Cephalopod smiled with his eyes and told him, "I'm glad you asked. So long as the Mimikyu has a record of your scent, it will be completely docile. Anyone else will be ripped to shreds. It's the perfect tool to keep things that we don't have the best confidence in keeping protected employing modern security science." "How much can it hold?" Izuku inquired. "As much as the box it inhabits," the professor answered. "Can it change boxes?" asked Egon. "I'm not sure about that. The object it inhabits becomes no different than the shell of a turtle," answered the professor. "How can we get things out of it? And won't it just eat anything that is given?" Izuku inquired again. The professor then tells him, "So long as it isn't organic, the Mimikyu can't digest it, which makes it a great organic waste disposal. It can even safely dispose of radiation. As for how to get things out of it, I implanted it with a form of suggestive telepathy. So long as you think of the item in question, it will give it to you, so long as you know it's there." He then walked up to the Mimikyu and said, "Observe." Professor Cephalopod then holds out one of his tentacles, and the Mimikyu opens up, while using its tongue to place a bag of fresh shrimp, tightly sealed up, into said tentacle. To prove his point further, the professor then opens the new bag and begins to eat one shrimp after the other, much to the mixed amazement and disgust of all parties present. "How do we care for it?" Egon wonders aloud. "It only needs a cup of water every month, a consistent temperature, and something that's considered sunlight. Apart from that, they could go years without a meal. But it does eat meat primarily," Professor Cephalopod explains. Egon sits back at his desk, takes off his glasses, and rubs his eyes before breathing heavily. He sits there thinking for a while before placing his glasses back on, lacing his finger, and tells the octopus, "Okay, Professor. Stop whatever you're doing and mass produce these things in different sizes." As he nods, a thought crosses his mind, and just before the meeting ends he says, "Ah yes, there is one more thing." Grabbing the man's attention, he tells him, "If attempting to maul their enemies to bits doesn't work, they have another defense mechanism." Egon raises an eyebrow, then thinks aloud. "From what you've told me, I can only guess that the Mimi in Mimikyu is for its connection to the mimic in D&D. But what about the cutie part? That must be its other defense mechanism." Professor Cephalopod nods and waves for him to follow, while taking the Mimikyu away in a trolley. Izuku and Egon look at one another, shrug, and follow the invertebrate out. After following, they were taken to a testing chamber where the Mimikyu was placed at the center, and all the doctors and professors were safely standing behind the protective observation room. Professor Cephalopod brought out a shabby-looking robot, and after getting inside the observation room with them, he used a remote controller to make the robot walk over to the Mimikyu. To which he looked at his coworkers and said with a pompous tone, "Observe." The robot then began to beat on top of the container, and the Mimikyu began to rustle and hiss. When it didn't stop, the Mimikyu jumped back and produced a set of long human legs, wearing a set of kitten heel boots and fishnet stockings. Professor Cephalopod smiles with his eyes and asks, "Impressive, no?" Egon and Izuku just stood there with their mouths open in shock, while Dr. Orpington just glared at her companion with narrowed eyes. After the initial shock washed over, Egon proclaimed, "Impressive. That's 2 major awards in a box. How in the world is that supposed to be a defense mechanism?" "Just watch," Otto assured him. Just then, the Mimikyu ran up to the robot like a drunk person and turned to its side. From there, it brought up its leg and began to produce a flurry of rapid kicks, so fast that its legs couldn't be seen, and the robot didn't get blasted away during the entire exchange until the last one was he flew to the other end of the testing room. The Mimikyu then got into a low stance and began to spin like a top, closing the distance and catching the robot in a whirlwind of legs, and finally, the Mimikyu jumped into the air and came down feet first, puncturing a huge hole clean through the robot's metal body with both heels. Holy! Egon was about to yell a curse word until Izuku cut him off, saying, "Wow. What do you think?" Professor Cephalopod self-assuredly asked in his work. Egon had to take a few minutes to process what he saw, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. And after that, he said to the octopus, "I think it's crazy and just what we need. Like I said before, you have my permission. Just make sure they don't eat anyone by accident." Professor Cephalopod nods with an eye smile and goes to retrieve his creation, leaving a flabbergasted Izuku and Egon, with an exasperated Dr. Cluck with them. "Okay, people and animals. I'm sure you all know why I've called you here today," Egon stated while slapping a table in a meeting room that everyone was sitting around. "It's your birthday?" Izuku guessed. "No," Egon replied. "It's Christmas," Otto guessed. "No," Egon replied more firmly. "It's the anniversary of your vasectomy," Cluck asked in a teasing tone. "Are you serious?" Egon irritatedly asked. "You called us here to tone down the crazy things we're making and doing to get the desired results," Izuku guessed, while fiddling with his fingers, making everyone tense up. "No, but that is a good point. So long as you guys aren't doing anything illegal or immoral, it won't turn into an end-of-the-world scenario. I don't see any harm in letting you guys do what you want to do," he told them, making everyone sigh before he slapped the table again and exclaimed, "No, why I called you here is about our team, or rather, lack of it. We need to hire more people ASAP. We also need an organizer, receptionist, and secretary just for you. I'm sure you're just chopping at the bit to do some of what we're doing." Cluck counters her off on her feathers in a tempting tone. Egon sighed, while rubbing his sore neck and saying, "Can't argue with that, but we do need more heads. We have many avenues to cover and only 3 minds to work with. And I can safely say, after a lot of the things that we've made so far, and we're able to sell, we are far more financially stable enough to have more employees." Otto clapped his tentacles and proclaimed, "Wonderful. Then let's set up some lectures at different universities and see who becomes interested. After all, what we do here would seem completely bogus to the unwise. So it's perfect to weed out the weak." "I'm in complete agreement with you, Professor. But I'll need you and the doctor to step out of this one," Egon tells the 2 animals who look at him incredulously. "Izuku and I will take the lead on that," he stated firmly. "What? Why?" Cluck argues back. "The world isn't going to magically be okay with talking animals overnight. It might cause an uproar or something worse," Izuku tells them in a fake musical tone, while wiggling his fingers. "What about that Nezu fella? He's a talking animal that's known to the public," Otto argues with a raised eyebrow ridge. "Principal Nezu is a whole different can of worms," Izuku tells him. "And one we don't have the time to get into," Egon adds firmly. Seeing their unpleasant expressions at them, Egon sighs and offers, "Look, we'll be the ones going to just about every university in Japan, while you 2 will stay here and look up any potential employees and set up interviews. The two animals think about this for a while, until Otto finally relents and says in agreement, "Well, that is better than trekking around in the hot sun all day." Cluck just shrugs with her coworker, also not wanting to walk all over the country. Egon nods in approval while saying in an exhausted tone, "Good to hear. Now let's set everything up and get to it. I seriously need a break." Many failed university lectures later, Egon stomps his way out of the emergency exit of a university auditorium. His face was red with a mix of anger and embarrassment as he practically foamed at the mouth. Running behind him was Izuku with a huge stack of things in his arms. All things are used as demonstrations and charts and graphs for lectures. That was the 20th auditorium we were laughed out of. Is it me? Is it you? Is what we're doing really that unbelievable? Egon lamented. From a third-person perspective, it kinda does. But at least this one apologized and gave us our money back for wasting our time. Izuku admitted, while taking all the objects down and counting a stack of cash he pulled from his pocket. "We've been to every university and college in Japan, and not one promising person or a smig of interest from all those $2. Half-brained, money-wasting, idiotic leches. This is hopeless," Egon yelled while dropping to his knees and yelling into the sky. Izuku rubbed his cheek and offered, "Maybe we should have brought the professor or doctor with us. Nothing tells the truth like hyper-intelligent talking animals." "Maybe," Egon admitted, while his face was flat on the ground. "Also, we still have one more college. Maybe this one will be a winner," Izuku tried to assure him in a chipper tone. Egon sighs deeply, then laments while giving in chorisencha. "Then let's get it over with so I can go cry into a tub of ice cream and fried chicken." Later, Egon stood before a now empty auditorium with an expression that could only be referred to as contained anguish. Besides him was Izuku, who felt like a clown for suggesting one more. After calming down a bit, his eye twitched, and he broke his pointing stick in frustration. After getting that out of his system, he stated, "Well, I guess that's it. What a piss up." "It could have been worse," Izuku tried to offer. Egon groaned and told him, "Thank you for the optimism, Izuku. But it's not appreciated at the moment." After wiping his hands across his face and making a painful sound, he began to pack his belongings while saying, "Let's go back so I can put myself into a food-based hangover. What happens if you infuse the two polarities together? Also, what would happen if you turned the frequency into a baseline instead of positive or negative? Would sound waves have any effect on this?" asked a voice that sounded close to Egon. Thinking it was the boy, Egon repressed the urge to growl and told him, "Izuku, I'd love nothing more than to trade theories with you, but right now that wasn't me." Izuku cut him off swiftly. Egon stood up after hearing this and looked into the empty auditorium one last time. He looked closely, narrowing his eyes and putting a hand over them to see better. After scanning the area, he finally came up on one single person left sitting in the now empty hall. "Professor Egon, did you hear me?" the person asked aloud. Going over to his assistant, Egon mouthed to him, "I think we found a winner." After this, Egon and Izuku invited the only person left to an impromptu interview outside the college's building. There they sat on benches looking across from one another on a stone table. The person left was a man in his late 30s wearing typical college attire. He was evenly tanned with blue eyes and a mild build with a height of just under 5'3". His face was angular and his eyes were tired. On his head was not hair, but 5 tube-like attachments that seemed to move on their own accord. 4 of the 5 were very snake-like, but had no features apart from a mouth in which the teeth were made into the lips, as opposed to being covered by them. The 5th one was like a tail. Thanks to Izuku, they were able to get a huge chunk of his background for this interview. Thanks to this, Izuku was given the chance to do the interview. I can't help but notice two things. First off, you are well into your late 30s and attending college. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Education should never be based on age, only those willing to learn. And also, it says here that you have over a dozen years in the music industry as a singer and performer. What compelled you to take such a drastic shift in career choices? Hankayo blows out the air in a stressed manner before explaining. Where do I start? Well, I'm sure you have no idea who I am. But back when I was a singer, I used to go by the name of Five Chord Gus. Oh, I think I've heard of you. You're from Europe, if I'm not mistaken. I know because I heard your rendition of O mio babino caro by Puccini, if I'm not mistaken. Egon cuts in with recognition. That's me. I used to sing a lot of songs back in my day. Hankayo confirmed as he continued. As for why I choose to pursue a different career choice, especially at this stage of my life, well, I'm sure you know. But I'll tell you everything anyway. I want to be completely transparent with you, since you're considering hiring me. The two of them look at one another. Nod and Izuku prompts him to continue. After a bit of internal conflict, Hankayo admits, ever since I was young, my Quirk 5 living chords gave me full control, range, and frequency of my vocals. I was a natural prodigy at singing. And my parents used this. From the time it manifested to the point my career ended, my parents used my talent to make bank. Every day was always about how I can improve and how I can get even bigger, he said in an irritated and disgusted tone. After breathing to calm himself, he continues saying, anyway, as you can guess, that was a lot of undue stress on a developing child, and my mind was hanging on by a thread for my whole life until I finally snapped. I am not proud of it, but I killed a lot of people on my very last performance day. Several people in the crowd, a few security guards, my manager, and my parents. He stops with a shaky breath and wipes away a stray tear. After calming down enough to speak correctly, he tells them none of those people deserve to die. Except for my parents and my manager. I'll never deny my feelings on that, he proclaimed boldly, making the two men across from him sweat drop. Hankayo coughs and continues with an apology. Sorry. Anyhow, I don't remember a lot of what happened after that. But I managed to get out of any legal trouble by settling outside of court. When my head cleared a bit, I had a recollection of what I did and checked myself into a mental ward. I got out in a year and had to spend the next few figuring out myself. My entire life, my world revolved around my talent for singing and nothing else. I had to do what most kids have their whole lives to do. That's when I realized I had a knack for discovery and knowledge, but didn't like going outside. So I decided to become a researcher and enrolled in this university. He takes another shaky breath, hugging himself to calm down before babbling. But I'll be honest, my only two regrets in life were killing all those people during my breakdown and never helping my two older siblings. They were always shunned by my parents, and I was favored up until this oldest turned 18 and moved out with the middle, and I never saw them again. I hope they are happier now than when they were with my parents. God, I miss them so much. I wish I could apologize to them. Hankayo realized what he was saying and doing. He retracts while apologetically stating, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Izuku waves it off and tells him, No, no, no. You needed to get that off your chest. Though if I may. Why come to Japan? Izuku inquired. Hankayo shrugs and tells him, just needed to get away from everything. A fresh start, you know. Izuku nods, looks to Egon, then back to Hankayo while asking, could you give us the room? Hankayo nods and walks off to a different spot, allowing the two men to speak in semi-privacy. From there, Izuku stands and asks his superior, Professor, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yes, he exclaimed. So you think we should give this guy a chance and hire him? He asked to make sure. But Egon disappointed him as he admitted, I was thinking we should stop by my favorite American restaurant and get some of their new cheese fries. But let's do your thing first. Izuku gives him a half-lidded stare while Egon shoots back. What? I'm hungry. Izuku shakes his head and walks back over to the man who is now making a flower crown. Mr. Henkaio, Izuku started, making the man stand up. The teen then stuck out his hand and said with a smile, Welcome aboard. Once you've graduated, you have a job waiting for you in the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility. Henkaio's face lit up like a Christmas tree, and he exclaimed in an excited voice while shaking his hand hard and fast. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll do my best to make you both proud. You won't regret this, making the boy and his head tendrils shake like crazy. Seeing that Izuku was stuck, Egon broke it up by saying, Don't thank us yet. You'll also be having the pleasure of running your division. Henkaio stopped shaking, and clutching a nearby tree, he asked back, looking ready to pass out. My division. It can be anything you want, Egon tells him. Well then. Henkaio thinks for a minute before offering. How about the sound division? The two men look at one another, shrug, and Egon says, If that's what you want. After many thanks and handshakes goodbye, Izuku and Egon begin to walk away from the college. And once they're seemingly far enough away, Egon turns to Izuku and asks, Should we be worried that the guy who has music-based PTSD wants to make an entire research division solely to the study of sound? Let's put a pin in it for now, Izuku tells him with equal concern. To which Izuku asks, Should we have told him about his other co-workers? Egon thinks about it, mentally rejects it, and replies, Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. Speaking of which, I wonder how they did on their manhunt. Later at Neo Icon Phoenix Research Lab. You found and set up how many? Egon exclaimed in shock as he looked over his 2 animal employees. 6 in total. That includes your assistant, secretary, and organizer. Professor Cephalopod answered, while adding sugar to his coffee in the coffee cart. As Egon stands in shock, Izuku does quick math and corrects him. Your math is off. It would be 8, not 6. You'll see what I mean at the interviews. Professor Cephalopod says vaguely with a knowing look, making Izuku more concerned than curious. So how did your search go? Dr. Orpington asked, while pecking at a loaf of bread. Like shit, Egon groaned while rolling his eyes. We did find one, Izuku corrects him. Wow, Professor Cephalopod resists the urge to chuckle, while Dr. Orpington holds no bars back and clucks out loud in laughter. Hey, don't laugh. We were kicked, laughed at, and chased out by so many of those uptight universities. We were lucky to get just one. Egon sams at the 2 creatures. After sighing in frustration, he states, Anyhow, let's just hope that these 6 people meet our criteria during the interviews. Headhunting is harder than it looks. Over the past 2 weeks, Egon and Izuku were able to interview every last person set up by Professor Cephalopod and Dr. Orpington. Each person came on a different day, and the interviewer changed from Izuku or Egon when one of them wasn't busy. Rarely was it to have both, and like before, Egon told Cephalopod and Orpington to take a back seat on this one, much to their dismay. The very first person they interviewed was an older Japanese woman with short black hair, a muscular yet chunky body, and a blue eye with one covered in an eye patch. Today's interviewer was Izuku, who skimmed through her background and her resume. So Miss Kobayashi Cho, it says you're 40 years old, he asked as the woman nodded. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not judging you because of your age. Just curious why you would be looking for a new job, Izuku assured her, already thinking about the worst-case scenario with his question. She thought for a minute, then explained. Well, I felt like I needed a change of pace, and retired life just wasn't cutting it for me. It's more something to keep me busy. As I am sure you saw, I have several degrees in manufacturing, construction, and research. I was a decorated war veteran, Purple Heart, she told him nonchalantly. War veteran, Izuku exclaimed, while nearly falling out of his seat. Cho then took out a few items from her bag and placed them in front of him. The first was a picture of her in full uniform and covered in medals. The next was a Purple Heart certificate. Izuku had to blink several times to ensure he saw this correctly. In a small voice, he said, "Oh my goodness. Due to my aid in the Battle of Chris, crossing by hot wiring the enemy tank and using it against them. That's where I lost my eye. I was able to bring the battle machine back, take it apart, see how it was made, and draw up schematics for us to use." She spun her short tail with a nostalgic tone. "That's incredible," Izuku exclaimed while pushing his hair back. He then stood up and saluted her while stating, "Well, ma'am, allow me to say thank you for your services and you're hired." Cho stood up with a smile and saluted him back. A few days later, Egon was the one to interview the next person who came. A tall, scruffy, and scrappy man with pink hair and golden eyes, covered in grease and oil with many tears in his clothing. In short, he did not look ready for an interview. His smile was big and proud, his excitement palpable, his eyes alert or eye. Since he only had one, and the other with a small portion of his face was covered up in a mechanical replacement. Wary of him already, Egon looked through both his background check and resume. After a bit of thought, he broached the topic, asking, "Mr. Shishihatsu, it says here you had some problematic behavior with your other workplace. Care to explain your side of the story?" He smiled while proudly pointing a thumb at himself and explaining, "Ah yes. You see, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I consider myself somewhat of an out-of-the-box genius." "Go on," Egon prompted him. "So I like to do things and test things that others don't or won't do. So that got me into a lot of trouble," he continues. "I see," Egon confirms. He then sighs while shrugging and saying, "So they fired me. But whatever I did, I got results even if they did explode 3 or 10 times. That's also how I replaced one of my eyes." "Uh-huh," Egon replied while narrowing his eyes. "If you are still not convinced, allow me to show you one of my inventions," he offered while taking something from inside his overalls and placing it on the table while exclaiming, "Ta-da!" Egon narrows his eyes as he observes aloud, "A toy sci-fi gun?" In front of him was what looked like a plastic ray gun with paint and stickers to make it appear appealing to children. Hatsum giggles and tells him, "That's just to make it appear less threatening. Allow me to demonstrate." He then pointed the toy at a small potted plant and shot. A beam came out, grabbed the plant, and pulled it right to his hand. The only thing Egon could say was, "Wow. It's a tractor beam," Hatsum said in a sing-song tone before things went wrong. As soon as the plant went to him, several other random things started to shift before flying at him and attaching to his body alongside Egon, who was pulled right out of his seat. From there, he was pressed front to front with Hatsum, nose to nose in a very awkward position. The two of them looked at one another for a long while before saying with a coy tone, "Oh sir, I didn't know you cared." "Turn. It's off," Egon growled at him. He flicked the off switch, and all the attracted items, including Egon, finally fell or broke away. Egon grunts at him and Hatsum chuckles nervously while saying, "It might still have a few bugs." After straightening out his lab coat and fixing his glasses, he tells the man, "If we hire you, then you'll have to be monitored, not have any interactions with others while working, and be placed in a highly secure room so you don't cause too much destruction." "Sounds perfect to me," Hatsum answered in zeal. After brushing himself off, Egon extends his hand and says, "Well, welcome aboard, Mr. Hatsum. Please don't make me regret this decision," he told him in a flat tone as Hatsum was shaking his hand excitedly. A week after that, the next newcomer came and was interviewed by Izuku. Once again with a background check and resume on hand, he looked over everything she had and he liked what he saw so far. The interviewee was a young woman in her mid-20s with long, straight blonde hair, green eyes, a mix of yellow and pink accessories, and glasses, and appeared to be mixed Japanese and Spanish. She seemed to be very excitable and always had a bright smile on her face the whole time. Before Izuku could say anything, the woman spoke out and told him in an elated tone. "First of all, I'd just like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, sir." "Thank you for coming out here, Misako Miyazaki," Izuku replied, while making sure to pronounce her name correctly. She giggles and waves her hand while offering, "Oh, please, call me Honey Lemon. All my friends do." "Well, Honey Lemon, I like what I see so far. You have many degrees and credentials to go with it." Izuku complimented her as he looked over her resume. "Thank you. I worked very hard to get them." Honey Lemon said back with a proud smile. "I'd just like to ask," Izuku began before she suddenly cut in again. "Oh, and if you're unsure about my abilities, I bought something with me to show you." "Do you have anything made of metal?" she asked while digging through her enormous shoulder bag. Izuku was a bit unsure, but allowed curiosity to take over, and he went to his comlink. Talking over, he called into the facility. "Can someone bring me something made of metal we don't need?" He then pushed the speaker button again and stated firmly, "And not a Mimikyu this time, please." A few minutes later, an in-process robot, created by Dr. Orpington, walked in with a sheet of metal. Once it stood the solid piece up it left, and Honey Lemon finally found what she was searching for. She jumped to the metal sheet and began to spray it with something that came out of a pink-colored spray bottle. After several sprays, it left a pink mist hanging all around it. From there, she pulled out another device that electricity charged the air around the mist and instantly turned the metal slab pink. "Ta-da!" Honey Lemon proclaimed. "So pink," Izuku observed while trying not to sound unimpressed. She chuckled excitedly and said in a sing-song tone, "Here's the best part." She then walked up to the pink metal and touched it with only her index finger. Right away, the sheet seemed to explode in a pink cloud all around them. Some of it was dusting Izuku's face, hair, and coat. "Whoa," was the only thing he could say in amazement. "I know, right? Chemical metal embrittlement," Honey Lemon exclaimed in zeal as she took over her pink-colored glasses and tried to brush off her pink outfit. Izuku quickly dusts himself off, and sticking out his hand, he tells her, "Well, Honey Lemon, you're hired." Honey Lemon squealed in delight and began to rapidly shake Izuku's hand while half yelling, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." Though she quickly realized how hard and rough she was shaking him and stopped while apologetically saying, "Oh, I'm sorry." The next day, Egon took up the next interview and was met with a man whose features were hard to pin down since several parts of him kept changing to different animals. The only constant thing was his green eyes and brown hair. Looking at his record and resume, Egon inquired, "Mr. Anima Genus, it says on your resume that you were a zoologist. Why come to work here?" Genus looked like he was resisting the urge to roll his eyes as he explained, "My previous work had me only studying animals and their environments, behavior, and nothing else. I wanted to try and find a new way to help animals with adjusting to new environments and bolster the population. Not dig through rhino dung to study their diet. I thought about changing my career choices for that, and here I am." "I can understand your frustration." Egon sympathizes with the man before looking and thinking things over before saying, "Well, consider yourself hired." 2 days after that, both Izuku and Egon were able to collaborate on the next interview. With the information in hand, the two men say across from their next potential employee. It was a short, stout woman of African descent. Her skin was colored like soil and freckles decorate her cheeks, and her hair was a giant blush that was shaped like an afro. Egon was the first to start by saying, "Mrs. Pamela Hollyhock, I'm a bit concerned with what I've found out about you." She raised an eyebrow as he continued and asked her, "You created a literal monster Venus flytrap, and it ate 3 people. Care to explain that? She huffed at that, then answered. Well, honey, back when I worked at the Tokyo Botanical Research Facility, I had told my coworkers to not come into one of the greenhouses for a while, as I was working on a special self-made assignment. Took it up with a whole chain of commands, and they okayed it. But a couple of yahoos tried to sneak in to steal it to take credit. And you can guess what happened after. So I had to take the blame and got canned. Izuku whistles in shock and amazement and says, Woof. What a deal breaker. I hate it when companies do nothing to protect their employees from the prospect of saving face. Hollyhock nods in reply. Izuku then goes off track and says, I can't say that those people deserved it. But if you get killed by a stationary plant, then at that point it's natural selection. He looks at Egon, and he shrugs nonchalantly. Hollyhock hums and agrees. I hear ya, honey. I do have one more concern to bring up. Your hair. Nothing wrong with it. It's just, well, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that a work environment like this has many dangers, including machinery and chemicals. I wouldn't want you to get hurt. Egon attempted to tell her as nicely as he could. She smiles, and with waves assures him. Not to worry, sweetie. I can control all plant life. With a twitch of her head, and her afro sinks and morphs into long braid-like veins. She then wiggles her index finger, and the potted plant on Egon's desk grows so large and fast that it breaks its pot and sprouts cut white flowers. The 2 men watched this in awe before looking at one another in amazement. Then back to her, where Egon proclaimed, Wow, well, you're hired. On the last day of the 2 weeks, Egon took hold of the last interview and was very confused going in. It was an interview for one, but there were 3 different jobs. Was one person trying to do 3 jobs? It made no sense, and Professor Cephalopod, who set it up, was no help in explaining it. Just being vague with a knowing and entertained glance. When he got to his office, he was even more confused when he was beset by 3 identical people. All females in their 30s, tall, thin, blue eyes, and black hair. All wearing the same clothes, and in fact, they all looked exactly like one another apart from the style of their hair. The one on the right had long hair in curls at the ends. The one in the middle had medium hair in ringlets. The one on the left had short hair that was side-swept. All 3 girls, upon seeing Egon, all got up and bowed deeply to him while saying in scary unison, Greetings, sir. Egon was taken aback and didn't know how to reply to this, which gave the girls more than enough time to introduce themselves. I'm Morgan, said the girl with long hair. I'm Megan, said the girl with medium hair. And I'm Millicent, said the girl with short hair. Egon took note of how all their voices sounded the same, and after adjusting himself to the uncomfortableness, he greeted back while asking, Nice to meet you girls as well. So you're all looking to become my organizer, secretary, and receptionist respectfully? Yes. He then looked down at his hands that held their resume, and he observed aloud. But you only gave me 1 resume. Why is that? We are 1 person. All 3 answered in unison. Egon raised an eyebrow and asked, Sorry? What do you mean? The 3 girls then closed their eyes and began to vibrate faster and faster until they became 3 blurry images. The 3 melded into one, and after the vibrating stopped, there stood a beautiful woman like the 3 girls before. She had the same face, eyes, and everything apart from her hair, which was long and straight. The woman bowed, and in the same voice, but with a different tone, greeted, Hello, sir. My name is Morgan Leifel. My quirk grants me the ability to split my body and consciousness in 3 ways. I've done this so many times up to the point where my other personalities do not like being in one body for too long. Egon blinks a few times and replies, This makes a lot more sense. After adjusting himself, he tells the woman, While I understand the fact you are 3 people with 1 body, by law, I can only pay you 1 salary. That was to be expected. Morgan agreed with a nod. Egon looked over her resume, and after a bit of thought he said, Well, I like what I see in your resume, so you're hired. Egon looked up from the paper only to see the three girls again as they spoke in unison. Thank you very much, sir. Egon had to repress the urge to freak out, and instead forcefully blew out air to stay calm as he muttered. That's gonna need some getting used to. After the 2 weeks had ended, Egon called for all the interviewees to attend a meeting at the facility, a few days later on their first official day of work. Everyone had gathered in the front entry loft where talk was abuzz in the area as everyone got to know one another. Though the talking quickly subsided when Egon and Izuku walked into the room. Everyone please gather around. Egon called as everyone present formed a circle around the two men. Egon cleared his throat and announced, as the owner and operator of the Teostra Research Laboratory, I would just like to be the first to say welcome and congratulations. It is a pleasure to have each one of you here working with us. Everyone clapped in response with some jumping for joy, whistling, or laughing. Egon put up his hand and once quite again he said, I expect to see great things and greater achievements from all of you. I hope you can make me proud. Yes, sir, everyone announced in unison. Egon clapped his hands and stated, Great to hear. Now if any of you have questions or concerns regarding anything, please bring it up with me or the Vice President Dr. Midoriya. He motions to the small boy beside him who looked like a frightened dog that just got yelled at for pooping inside the house. No hands went up, much to Izuku's relief. Public speaking was never a skill for him. That is until Hollyhock raised her hand. Izuku gulped and steadied himself as he called out, Yes. How exactly did you two run this place? It's huge and has been in operation for weeks. How'd you do it? She asked the two men. The two of them looked at one another before smiling as Egon answered. I'm glad you asked because I was thinking of a way to tell you all that. Before all of you, we had two others helping us. They'll be your senior co-workers, and I warned you they are a bit strange. All the people looked at him confused, or like he was crazy, making Egon's sweat drop at seeing them not understand. Izuku tugged on his sleeve and offered, Maybe it would be better if we just showed them. Izuku then went over to the front desk phone and pushed the facility speaker button. He called, Professor Cephalopod and Dr. Orpington, please come to the main foyer. After putting the phone down, they were all struck with the sound of something very fast speed down the hallway and towards their direction. After finding the source, they all stepped away from the hallway as they heard two voices yelling at each other, both getting closer and closer with each word. Slow down, you pompous poultry, Professor Cephalopod screamed in fright. I can't. Your slimy fish bowl fried my controls, Dr. Orpington screamed back at him as she attempted to gain control over her cart. We're gonna crash, the professor yelled as one of the foyer walls zoomed into view. I'm gonna die, crowed the doctor in terror. Suddenly, the mechanical cart crashed into the wall at top speed with bits of parts, metal, glass, and water flying all over the place as everyone jumped out of the way, covered themselves up, or watched in a mixture of awe and horror. The last thing of all to happen in the chaos was a single wheel that rolled out from the wreckage and spun around to stop on the floor in front of them. What was that? The Morgana triplets asked in unison. Your co-workers. Egon drowned. The two animals managed to pull themselves out from the wreckage and stumble into view. Luckily, it did seem like they were hurt, just dazed from the impact. Otto was the first to shake out his stupor and saw that they were being looked at by all the new employees with confusion. Adjusting himself and his translator, he saw his compatriot and tried to get her back into motion. He slapped the doctor's back and stated, Put yourself to getting penny henny. Our new work associates are here, and you're making us look bad. My brain feels like pudding, Cluck replied in a dazed tone, with swirls in her eyes. Foregoing trying to help her, he turned around, and after clearing his throat, he introduced himself. Greetings, everyone. My name is Professor Otto Cephalopod. It's a pleasure to be working together with so many intelligent minds. And the half-dead bird you see is my associate, Dr. Cluck Orpington. He motions to the chicken that was barely able to stand on its legs. Suddenly Cluck shook herself back to consciousness and exclaimed, "Your associate? I think you mean my associate." Otto rolled his eyes and shot back. "Of course. You'd come out of your stupor for a comment like that." "What's that supposed to mean?" she yelled while getting into his face. "Why don't you use that big head of yours to figure it out, Chicken Little?" he yelled while pushing her back. She growled and yelled, "My head may be big, but at least my brain is smarter than yours, Squidward." Otto then curled his tentacles in anger and proclaimed, "I hate how his name and species don't correlate with one another." As the two of them continued to bicker, everyone else was staring at the two hyper-intelligent animals in a mixture of awe, wonder, and confusion, making Egon slap his face, while Izuku smiled and laughed awkwardly. Talking animals. Hankayo observes aloud. Cool, Honeylemon, Hatsune, and Jenna speak in unison. "I hope you boys didn't make any talking plants?" Hollyhock asks suspiciously. "Not yet." Egon tells her with a sigh, knowing the inevitable. "You could be the first," Izuku jokingly offered. Cho shakes her head and states, "Welp, I've officially seen it all." Hankayo places a hand on her shoulder and tells her, "I get the feeling you're saying that too soon." As he told her this, Pete walked into the room, attracted to all the commotion, and began to peck mindlessly at the destroyed machine. Cho went to open her mouth, but Hankayo tightened his grip, making her look at him, where he just solemnly shook his head. Cho understood and just dropped it, allowing everything to play out as it was, in chaos. Egon looked over a large sheet of schematics on his much cleaner desk. It was a map of the whole facility with a detailed outline of all security measures on the premises. Hidden turrets, traps, sensors, Tesla gates, and much more were outlined in the promise of max security. After looking it over for quite a while, he fixed his glasses to look up at the happily excited smiling face of Dr. Cho. He cleared his throat and told her in a nervous tone that he enjoyed, "While I do like the schematics you have for an in-facility security system, Dr. Cho, I'm just a bit worried about how should I say this? Extreme and fatal it is. Don't you think it's a bit much?" Cho raised an eyebrow as she leaned in and shot back. "With what we got and are doing here, I'd say it's almost too little. This is honestly the watered-down version of what I originally thought up." "Holy Christ," Egon exclaimed as he thought about the ramifications, watching as Cho said back to glance at him with a smug look. Seeing her point, he told her with a sigh, "Well, I can't argue with that. I'll allow it, and if need be we'll add more later on. But add some non-lethal defenses as well. Can't be all gun-ho for every situation. You may commence construction on it." Dr. Cho nods and rolls up the diagrams before leaving the new automatic sliding doors made by Professor Hatsune. Once she left, the doors stayed open as someone else barged in. Egon noticed this, looked up from his desk, and saw Izuku. He was red in the face, shaking like a leaf, and 2 seconds from crying. Egon sighed lightly to himself and said, "Oh boy. Yes, Izuku. What have you done this time?" "I had an accident," he finally admitted through a shaky breath. "I thought you were housebroken," Egon replied with a raised eyebrow. "Professor," he shouted back in a mix of panic and anger. Egon placed up his hands, and in a calm tone told him, "I'm just teasing. What's bugging you so badly?" Izuku sniffs back his emotions and steadies his voice as he answers, "I was dabbling around with the evolution and Quirk splinters, and I made something I had no intention of making." Egon waits for the rest, but when it doesn't come, he prompts him firmly, "Well, don't leave me in suspense. Tell me what it is." Izuku walked up to his desk on shaky legs, his emotions just moments from spilling over as fear gripped his heart at how his boss would react to his newest blunder. And so he reached into his coat and brought out a small creature cupped in his hands, showing it to the man reluctantly. "Here." he said with a quiver. Egon looked down at the little creature, adjusting his glasses, seeming to be nothing but an oddly colored lizard. He chuckled at what Izuku was so scared about showing him and proclaimed, "Is that it? This teeny tiny little lizard is all that you made? I was expecting something far more." He trailed off as the small lizard took a mammalian gait, sprouted a set of small wings, and breathed out a puff of smoky fire. "Dangerous," he said in confusion. He looked at the boy who was begging to shake and cry while asking him calmly, "Izuku, did you make him?" The boy broke down into tears, hunching over and covering his face as he wailed, "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize it would happen." Egon was shocked by his reaction to him and almost froze up. But luckily he kept himself together and placed the baby dragon on his desk while he tended to the terrified crying boy. Holding his shoulders and petting his head, he told him, Okay, let's calm down for a moment. I'm not mad, just surprised. It's not like you tried to hide this from me until it got out of hand, or did it behind my back, and you have told me that it was a complete accident. Just give me the rundown of what happened. Why you're not mad." Izuku looked up with red eyes and a runny nose. "Just surprised, that's all," Egon assures him. Izuku sniffles and gets help cleaning up his face from Egon as he explains her. "Well, after testing and gaining the results of the Quirk and evolution splinters, I thought about what would happen if both were used on the same creature. No plant I used would work, so I used an animal instead. And to minimize any damage, I used a small creature that was a baby." He let Izuku breathe and collect himself a bit before he continued. But after 5 minutes, he gently prompted him, "Go on." "So I used the fertilized egg case of a gecko. And when it hatched, this came out. And I came to you as soon as I did." He finally finished off. Egon sat back on his butt on the floor and breathed a sigh of relief, which was close enough for the baby dragon to climb onto his head, down his face, over his body, and across his lap before climbing into Izuku. The little lizard crawled up to his neck and cuddled into it. Observing the animal, Egon noticed how different it was from most reptiles at a second glance. Apart from the wings and mammalian gait, it had distinct claws on all 4 of its limbs, a head it held upright, 2 stubs of horns, eyes large enough to be seen from both the side and front, colored a blood orange to red, and its skin was like a mix of scales and regular skin. Still, it was the normal size for a newly hatched gecko. After he breathed out any stress, he told Izuku in a calm tone, "Okay, good. I know the details. We can work on finding out more pressing things about this new species, like how big it will grow, what it will eat, what temperament it will have, and so forth. After that, we will decide on whether to keep or kill it while it's still young and manageable." "No need for that. I have just the solution." A voice called from the still open doorway. Both men looked over and together they said aloud, "Professor Cephalopod." "What do you mean by that?" Izuku asks him. "Me and Professor Genus were collaborating." He stared off. "That's not good," Egon muttered under his breath. "And made this." He finishes while placing a strange splinter at their feet that seemed to change the brightness of itself while changing to many psychedelic colors. Egon held up the strange pulsating splinter and asked, "And this is?" "This splinter does in days what thousands of years of selective breeding does," the professor explained vaguely. "Huh?" both said at once. The professor rolls his eyes and explains further. "Keep it near any wild thing, and it will become as domestic as a dog in just a few days." "Well, at least this solves that specific dilemma of this thing turning on us and into a meal," Izuku stated, while admitting the splinter's strange colors. As the 2 men were looking at the psychedelic splinter, Otto tried to make his escape, only for Egon to catch wind of something and shout, "Hold it right there, calamari boy," before he could scramble. Egon grabbed the octopus under his eyes and brought him face to face where he stated, "What else?" "What do you mean?" Otto asked back innocently. Egon squeezed him tighter and exclaimed, "Don't, what do I mean me? My ick may not be half as high as yours, but I wasn't born yesterday. What else did you and Professor Genus make while collaborating?" Giving a nervous laugh and rubbing the back of his head, he admitted, "Ah, yes, about that. I was going to come to you about something else." "What?" Egon growled while squeezing him again. After a moment of contemplation, Cephalopod tells him, "You're going to have to change Gammoth's feeding regimen." "Why? To what?" Izuku was the one to inquire, being the main caretaker. "An adult amount," Cephalopod tells him while trying to look away and sweating. Izuku looks at him weirdly and Egon adjusts his grip, so the two could speak face to face as Izuku asks further. "She's a baby. She won't be an adult for another decade or so." "About that?" Cephalopod laughs nervously. Egon squeezed him again and snarled, "About what?" After tapping his tentacles, he tried to say, "Well," before he could answer fully, a loud sound, like a trumpet being amplified through a jet engine, sounded through the now closed door. Both men looked at one another when the sound stopped and ran out the automatic door, Cephalopod still in Egon's hand. As they ran, the loud sound rang out once more, and they were able to follow it right to the front entry foyer, where they saw something that made their jaws drop. Standing in front of them and eating the decorative plants, while Dr. Genus tried to get a hold of it, was a fully grown woolly mammoth. Meanwhile, Megan, who was manning the desk, looked unfazed at the enormous prehistoric creature eating everything around her. After letting the shock and the amazement pass them, Egon asked rhetorically, "Professor Cephalopod, why is our baby mammoth calf now a full-grown adult mammoth cow? Me and Professor Genus have made several different splinters for population surging, one of which causes any organism to rapidly develop." The professor admitted, only to be squeezed again as he asked in a repressed angry tone, "And you tried to hide this from me, why?" "We needed to run more tests," Otto explained while sweating before he tried to save himself by offering, "On the plus side, we made sure to spay her before doing so." Egon gave him a half-lidded look as Izuku informed him, "You know that only works on boys, right?" Making the professor turn pale. Egon looked ready to burst a gasket, and even the now fully grown Gammoth could sense it and started to walk away. Izuku stepped back with the baby dragon hiding in his hair, and Genus started to hide behind the desk as Megan tried to make herself look busy. But no furry came, and he calmed himself down with an irritated sigh as he stated calmly, "Izuku, you are no longer solely responsible for the care of Gammoth. From now on, Professors Cephalopod and Genus will help as well." "Understood." "Why, yes, sir." The octopus and man replied quickly in unison. After placing the octopus on the ground and fixing his hair and glasses, he turned back to the facility and said, "Come along, Izuku. Let's run some tests and diagnostics on a new fire-breathing friend." With that, Izuku filled after him to a testing chamber to run tests on the new animal, leaving Cephalopod and Genus to try and round up Gammoth back into her enclosure. Truly the first of many strange days to come. One day at the Neo-Icon Phoenix Research Facility, the front entry phone rang for the first time in its entire time of opening. It only rang once before quickly being picked up. "Hello and thank you for calling. This is the front desk of Neo-Icon Phoenix Research Facility. This is Megan speaking. How may I assist you today?" she asked while flipping her hair out of the way for her ear. Some talking was heard from the other end and Megan replied, "Uh-huh." After a bit more talk, Megan said, "One moment, sir, I'll transfer you." She pressed a few buttons and told her other half what was happening, and she answered, "Hello and thank you for calling. This is Millicent, the head secretary. How may I assist you?" She answers as the voice speaks, and she replies, "Uh-huh." A bit more talk and Millicent says, "One moment, sir, I'll see if he's in his office." She put the person on hold and punched into Egon's office phone. After a few rings, the receiver was picked up. Yes, Millicent, Egon answers. Sir, there's a man on the other line looking for you. Goes by the name of Nezu. Claiming to be the principal of UA. She informed him. Struck with confusion, as well as concern, he quickly decides and tells her, punch him through. Hanging up on him, she punches back Nezu on the other end and says, hello, sir? Nezu replies, and she tells him, yes, he's in the office and able to speak. I'll put you right through. Nezu says a few things and Millicent says, have a nice day, sir. Millicent transfers him over to Egon. His phone rings, and he picks it up while answering. Hello? Professor Egon Cristallo, Nezu's voice says on the other end. Egon could tell he was the real deal from the many interviews he's heard his voice over TV. He breathes and answers, speaking. This is Nezu, principal of UA. I hope I'm not intruding on anything. He introduced him with an apologetic tone. Waving off the phone, he replies, no, not at all. What can I do for you? There is a bit of silence, and Nezu finally tells him with some hesitation in his tone. You see, I've heard quite a bit about you and your facilities. Egon raised an eyebrow as he leaned forward and asked, really? Man, we haven't even brought out the big stuff yet or gone public, and we already have a whisper of a reputation. I hope it's good. Nezu nods silently on the other end, and he answers, yes, all good things. The thing is, I'm in a bit of a pickle. Go on, Egon prompted him, feeling his caution rise again. Nezu clears his throat and explains. Here at UA, we have something called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. And I'm sure you remember that awful typhoon that swept by here recently. Egon blows out the air between his lips and complains. How could I not? That storm knocked down every tree we had just planted. I'm sorry to hear about your trees, but the USJ got the worst of it and requires massive repairs. Nezu continues. More than confused by this point, Egon gets straight to the point and states, I'm not sure I understand where you're getting at. In short, we use that place to teach our students rescue work. Unfortunately, we can't now. But I recently heard about your facility and had an idea. He told him as Egon raised an eyebrow in suspicion and intrigue. Would you be so kind as to allow our first years to practice in your facility? Nezu asked with as much sincerity as he could muster over the phone. This shocked the man, and with a flabbergasted tone he told him, though I love nothing more than helping the youth, I also must tell you we aren't half as big or prepared for handling the education of rescue work. I completely understand that, which is why I have something else in mind. A treasure hunt, if you will. Nezu explained, making Egon more curious as he continued. The students go around and collect clues on villain activities, find out what's what, and reach the goal. Like detective work. Egon becomes intrigued with the idea and says, that sounds far more realistic for us. And I was also hoping to turn it into a field trip for our students. Teach them about the wider world of science and everything it goes into their daily lives. I'm more than capable of realizing that our youth is so romanticized by heroes that they have no respect or idea about what goes on behind the scenes with the creation of suits and gear and such, Nezu explained and asked him. Egon thought it over for a moment before saying in agreement, that sounds like a great idea. Oh, but I'll need a list of students attending so I can make proper arrangements. Of course. Please give me a moment and… There. It should have gone through. Nezu says as the sound of typing can be heard. Egon sees an email get sent over, and he wonders how Nezu got it, let alone the number for his facility. That's something he'll have to find out later as he replies. I see it. Now let's see. He looks over the long list containing 40 students, 20 in total from 2 classes. As he looks over the list, he sees a certain name that sticks out. After shaking his head and scrolling back up, he exclaimed, Oh, is something wrong? Nezu asked. Huh? Egon said in a stupor. realizing he and Nezu were still talking. He then replied in a shaken tone, "Oh, nothing is wrong, could I call you back later? I have to check up with my second in command." Nezu is quiet, but eventually says back, "Of course. Take all the time you need. If I don't hear from you by the end of the week, I'll assume it's a no." Egon repressed the urge to sigh in relief and said before hanging up, "Thank you, Principal Nezu. Have a nice day." He slams the phone down, huffs a sigh, leans back with his hand in his face, and quickly stands up. He leaves his office, and after getting into the hallway, he says to himself in stress, "Boy, oh boy, Izuku is going to freak out when he hears this." It only took him a few minutes to get to Izuku's office, though he wished it was a long walk since he had no idea how to go about breaching this subject. He was feeling more stressed than when he asked the most popular girl in school to dance and got rejected. He made it to the door, breathed deeply, pushed back his hair, and allowed the automatic to open as he knocked on the meta while poking his head in. "Izuku, are you busy?" he asked while looking around. There, he saw Izuku sitting at his desk with the computer up and the video camera on with the mic already plugged in. He turned around and quickly replied, "No, Professor, I'm not. I was about to give my addendum on what's been going on with the laboratory. Mammoth. All the new splinters and discoveries, and even a little torch wick here. But that can wait. There's something I have to tell you," he told the boy while walking as he rubbed the back of his head. "What is it?" Izuku inquired, feeling curious and a bit worried. Egon breathed deeply with stress while pulling his fingers under his chin and told him, "Okay, you know what? I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I'll just tell you straight up." This makes Izuku more nervous as the man explained. "So the principal of UA called just earlier asking to use the lab for some kind of hero exercise or something. I don't know. And he sent me a list of students' names to see how many would attend. And this name stood out most of all." Egon opened up his phone to the email that was sent to him and reluctantly handed it over to Izuku. Izuku was more than confused as he took the device and looked over the list of many different names. Names he didn't recognize in the slightest, except for Uraraka. That is until his eyes fell upon the name that Egon dreaded to show him. He had to double back to make sure, and when he did he freaked out. "Kaken," Izuku screamed in shock. "Yeah," Egon admitted uncomfortably while rubbing his head. Izuku's head dropped, his face overcast, his shoulders shook, and his hands trembled as tears threatened to spill out. But even so, he managed to say, "I should have known. He's always been amazing at everything. Always. I didn't tell him yes or anything like that yet. I just told him to wait." Egon quickly assured him while waving his hands rapidly. He then took a breath, kneeled to his level, placed a hand on his shoulder, and offered, "Izuku, if you are not comfortable with this, I can call him right now and tell him it's off. He won't mind." Izuku wipes away the tears and replies with a quiver in his tone, No, it's okay really. It'll be fine so long as we don't see each other. I'll just stay in my office the whole day. That won't be hard." Egon relented, but told him, "If you say so. But just to be safe, I'll have a guard at your door and have him be monitored. If anything happens, I'll stop him." "Thank you. I appreciate it really," Izuku replied while looking away. Egon then wrapped him in a hug and squeezed him tightly. He told him, "Of course. Anything for my favorite person in the whole world." Izuku hugged him back and Egon told him before leaving, "I hope this goes well." Egon then got up, walked back through the door and left to make his return call to the principal, leaving Izuku behind in his office to turn back to the computer setup and give his addendum. Breathing deeply, he centered himself before turning on the record button and starting his report. "This is Dr. Izuku Midoriya reporting once again to give an update on the goings-on here at the Neo Icon Phoenix Research Facility. Well, it's less of an experimental log and more of an update report. I haven't been able to do many experiments and what I do have is in the planning stage. I did make one thing. I'll get to that later. Okay, I'm rambling now, so I'll just get straight into it. We have been able to hire several new employees here at the facility to help with other avenues of research, all of which are heads of their divisions. Theirs is Dr. Hankayo Suru, the head of the Sound Division, Professor Kobayashi Cho, the head of the Defense and Armaments Division, Professor Shishi Hatsum L., the head of the Robotics and Machine Division, Dr. Pamela Hollyhock, the head of the Botanical Division, Professor Anima Genis, the head of the Creature Division, Professor Eiko Miyazaki, or as she likes to be called, Honey Lemon, is the head of the Chemical Division. And finally, the Morgana triplets aren't doctors or professors, but instead act as much-needed help for Professor Egon. We have a lot of bases covered, and I'm glad for that. It's only been a week and much has been done already. For instance, Professor Hatsum has already decked out the entire facility with state-of-the-art devices, such as automatic doors, finger and eye scanners, a speedier internet and network. He's even starting construction on a unit of different robots. They're there for things like defense, cleaning, tours, and so much more. Mostly for the grunt work that would take up too much time. I even heard a rumor that Professor Cho was going to outfit the facility with military-grade defense weapons and other such things, which we will need in the long run. Dr. Hollyhock is having a field day in the greenhouses. She's made so much stuff, I can recall it all at once. Honey Lemon is having a great time without any restrictions on materials and has made planes and lots of discoveries that she couldn't before. Unlike Hatsum, who had blown up a time or 10, she has things set in place and dots all her. I'm to make sure nothing unexpected happens, or at least attempts to mitigate the damage. The triplets have cut Professor Egon's work, but so I'm sure he'll finally be able to start work on experiments. And finally is Dr. Hankayo, who has had the most success thus far. He's managed to turn one of the splinter's frequencies into a baseline, and that's from both the positive and negative charges. We're not sure what a baseline frequency does, but we'll find out. He's also discovered that any splinter's frequency can be altered with the air of sound waves. He can turn a positive into a negative and vice versa, which brought up the topics of the main vein. He and I have crossed minds and theorized that when the Singularity Soul was subject to tectonic movements, the frequency it produced also changed, affecting both evolution on Earth as well as the first quirks. But it's unlikely that such a small fragment could affect a whole planet. So their plan of going to the same dig site to see if we can retrieve more. Speaking of collaborations between divisions, Professor Cephalopod and Janus have done the same, and quite a lot that they initially tried to hide from Professor Egon. He was not happy about that. I swear I just about saw him breathe fire. Anyway, like I said, they've done a lot. First off, they somehow managed to make splinters that do some of the craziest things I've seen. The goal is to help with the decline of and near extinction of animals. Instead of making splinters that copy DNA or some kind of present gas or liquid, they were able to create them by the use of mixing several kinds of quirks and exposing them to the vibration therapy from Dr. Hankayo. Though most are still in testing. As for what they have, the list is as followed. The Little Lady Splinter. This one can cause any female creature with a working set of reproductive organs to become pregnant with a biological clone of herself. The Rough and Rowdy Splinter. This one can cause any creature, male or female, to go into its natural mating cycle, even if it isn't the time of year. The Calm and Cool Splinter. This one can cause any creature to instantly become acclimated to any new environments it's put in and show no signs of stress. This allows animals like rhinos and pandas to more easily mate. Growth Spurt. This one increases the potency of the Singularity Soul's natural ability to cause minor organisms to rapidly age, thus causing animals that could take years or even decades to fully mature to do so overnight. This one has been tested. Unfortunately, it wasn't smartly used on the right subject. And now Gammoth is a full-grown adult. And all before I found anything specific about her ancient diet. The good boy. This one causes any animal that is not already domesticated to become as willing and sociable as a dog. Once again, used in Gammoth and one other. The scrambled mixer. This one brushes away the problem of inbreeding in the case of one or two individuals left in a species. When in proximity, the subject's DNA will become completely scrambled to the point they are biologically unrelated, thus allowing siblings and parents to mate in times of crisis. Note: I didn't name any of these splinters. All this talk of animals brings me to my next bit of news to share. In the little time I did have when not worrying about other things, I was able to do some testing with both the evolution splinter and Quirk splinter. I had wondered what would happen when both were exposed at the same time. So I started my experiments with plants, as they would most easily get under control. However, that didn't work, as no matter what plant I tried in any state of development or any kind would simply die. I guess the radiation was too much. So I decided to use an animal. And for safety, I used the smallest one I could that could handle both radiations simultaneously and a baby. After acquiring the gecko egg, I placed it in the incubator and kept both splinters close. About 5 days later, and it hatched into something I didn't expect in the least. In short, it became a dragon. I was scared shitless at the thought of what Egon would say or act about this, but I knew that hiding it would be worse. So on the verge of tears and a breakdown, I reluctantly showed him, and to my surprise, he was only just that, surprised. I guess I was overthinking it all, but my previous experiences with stuff like this way otherwise. Then again, I did take a lot of unnecessary risks, which is why he acted that way so many times. And I didn't hide it from him, just went straight to him once I realized what it was. Sorry, I'm rambling again. Anyhow, after using the good boy splinter on it, we now have no issues with the dragon making a meal for us when it's older. He is so friendly now, but he was always like that with me. I guess he imprinted on me. On a side note, we've decided to call him Torchwick, and we're not sure if he's a he at all. Speaking of Torchwick, we ran some tests to see what was what about him. There's a lot to cover, but the main thing we focused on was his rate of growth, and it is fast. It's only been about 2 days since his birth, and he's already gone from the size of a gecko to a large parrot. It is strange, even as he sits on my shoulder as I record this. Note: he ate several of the new animals with quirks, including the budgie that had the sound mimic quirk, the hypnotic peacock, and the glowing pigeon. Luckily, the shimmering koi fish, hydrokinetic axolotl, giant salamander, and Pete were all spared. Torchwick also learned pretty quickly not to mess with Professor Cephalopod and Dr. Orpington when they slapped and nearly pecked him to death. On a different note, I found out why the experimental newt exploded during its quirk awakening. It performed some kind of self-destructive asexual reproduction. When exposed to enough stress, i.e., the radiation from the splinter, it exploded, and from its body expelled hundreds of tiny eggs that all grew into full-grown newts with the same quirk. Now we have dozens of these things and have to walk on eggshells to make sure they don't cause a chain reaction of birthing. Knowing this, Professor Cephalopod and Janus wanted to recreate the quirk in their animal population project. But that idea was quickly shut down and forbidden by Professor Egon, who said it was far too cruel. And I agree. Note: keep Torchwick away from the newts. And now the final point I must bring up comes from just earlier today, just before I started this new recording. Egon told me that Yua wants to come here for reasons, and then he showed me a list of all the students attending, and amongst them was K. Kaken. I won't lie, I thought my heart would stop at seeing that name. I didn't expect it, but I really shouldn't be surprised. Kaken was always amazing. He always wanted to be a hero and shoot for Yua. I guess he did, in the end. I thought I was over all of it. Wanting to be a hero and everything about Kaken. But after seeing his name, It all just came back to me. The anger, the jealousy, the hate, the desire, the sadness. I thought I was better, or at least numb, but I guess I never was. I'm scared of what could happen to me if I see him. I don't want that to happen. I never want to see him again. Ever. Is it maybe too late to tell Egon to take it all back? Maybe. But it's only for one day, and I don't have to interact with him. I can through this, right? After all, it's not like All Might would be joining as well. That would just open a whole new can of worms. Report end.